Hello guys, welcome to Gringotts Hub. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Harry found a Potter-Black-Merlin vault at age 7 and discovered Dumbledore had stolen 10 million galleons? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Blood Call. The garden smelled like petrol and cut grass, and Harry Potter was on his knees in it because Uncle Vernon had decided the flower beds needed weeding before noon. It was a Tuesday in July. Harry was 7 years old, and his knees hurt, and he hadn't eaten since yesterday's half-sandwich that Dudley hadn't wanted. The sun was already mean and bright, the kind that found the back of your neck and stayed there, and the Dursleys' garden was immaculate enough already that Harry was essentially pulling up perfectly healthy plants so Vernon could watch him do it from the kitchen window. He didn't cry about it. He'd learned a long time ago that crying didn't accomplish anything except making his eyes sting and giving Aunt Petunia something to call pathetic. He just worked, and he thought, which was the only thing the Dursleys had never managed to take from him. He thought about the bird he'd seen last week, a red kite, hanging in the air above Privet Drive like it owned the sky. He thought about numbers. He was good at numbers, even though he wasn't allowed to be better than Dudley at school, and he was working out, silently, how many weeds there were per square foot of the flower bed, and how long it would actually take to finish, and whether he could stretch it long enough to stay outside until lunch. He was thinking so hard about nothing important that he almost missed it. Almost. It started in his chest. Not pain, nothing so simple as pain. It was more like the feeling of a word sitting on the tip of your tongue, except it was in his ribs, in the place behind his sternum. A pull like something had taken hold of a thread sewn into the center of him and was tugging, gently, with absolute certainty, in a direction that wasn't any compass point he knew. Harry sat back on his heels and pressed his hand against his chest. The pull got stronger. The air around him went very still. Not quiet, the street sounds were still there, car and birdsong and the distant mutter of the Dursleys' telly, but still, like the world had taken a breath and not yet decided to let it out. Harry looked at his hands. The dirt on his palms was vibrating in tiny, rhythmic pulses, like his skin had its own heartbeat now, one that ran deeper than the one in his throat. The flower bed in front of him bloomed. Not gradually. Not like normal flowers growing. Every dead and pruned thing in a 6-foot radius simply opened, full and sudden and riotously alive, roses and lavender and things Harry didn't have names for, in colors he'd never seen in a garden. The grass under his knees turned green so vivid it almost hurt. "What?" said Harry, very quietly. Then the owl arrived. It wasn't like Dudley's cartoons, where owls were soft and round and a bit dopey. This one was enormous, barn owl coloring, but the size of an eagle, with amber eyes that looked at Harry with what he could only describe as professional recognition. It landed on the garden wall without any flapping or fuss, and it was carrying a letter, and the letter was sealed with wax the color of old gold, and the seal was a crest that made the pull in Harry's chest lurch. He crossed the garden and took the letter before he'd consciously decided to. The seal showed 3 things, a sword, a goblet, and an open hand. Below them, in letters pressed so deep they felt carved rather than stamped, it read, Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Inheritance Division. Urgent. Harry opened it. To the heir of the House of Potter, the House of Black, and the ancient House of Emrys, Gringotts Wizarding Bank has detected the activation of a blood inheritance call originating from Vault 333, Potter Legacy Trust, Vault 711, Black Family Vault, sealed pending heir verification, and Vault 1, the Emrys Merlin Foundation Vault, sealed since 578 AD and opened for the first time in recorded Gringotts history by your blood signature, recorded at 9:47 this morning. Your presence is required at Gringotts, Diagon Alley, London at your earliest convenience. We have sent transportation. Ragnarok, Senior Director, Inheritance and Estates, Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Harry read it twice. Then a third time, because the part about a vault that had been sealed since 578 AD seemed like the kind of thing you should read more than twice. He looked up from the letter. 3 goblins were standing at the garden gate. They were dressed in what looked like formal bankers' clothes, dark waistcoats, watch chains, very shiny shoes, except that each of them was about 4 feet tall, with the long fingers and the sharp, careful eyes that Harry somehow knew were goblin eyes, the way you know some things without being told. The one in the center was older, his face a map of deep lines, his eyes the color of hammered copper. He was looking at Harry with an expression that Harry would later learn to recognize as the goblin equivalent of deep, sustained outrage being professionally suppressed. "Harry Potter," the central goblin said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," said Harry. He didn't know how he felt yet. He was waiting to find out. "I am Ragnarok. We have correspondence to discuss." The goblin's eyes moved to the flowering garden, then back to Harry. Something flickered in his expression. And apparently no time to waste. "Okay," said Harry. Then, because he had been raised by people who cared very much about appearances, I should probably tell my aunt. Ragnarok's expression didn't change. "That will not be necessary. Our transportation is warded. No one in this household will notice your absence until we choose to return you, or until certain legal proceedings make the question of your return entirely moot." Harry looked at the house. Vernon was still visible through the kitchen window, a large, red-necked shape eating toast and reading a newspaper and not looking at the garden. Harry looked back at Ragnarok. "Let's go," he said. The way into Diagon Alley was through a pub Harry would not have looked at twice, a slightly dingy place called the Leaky Cauldron, where the barman had no hair and a very kind face and went very still when he saw Harry, the kind of still that meant recognition. Harry filed that away. He was good at filing things. The alley behind the pub opened through a brick wall, and it was the first time in Harry's memory, his real memory, not the strange flickering impressions that sometimes woke him at night, that he stood in a place that felt like it had always existed for him. Like the world had been folded to fit, and this was the fold. He didn't say that out loud. He just walked. Gringotts was at the top of the alley, white marble and goblin guards and a set of doors that somehow communicated, without saying a word, that they had been important for a very long time. The goblins inside were doing calculations and moving coins and writing in enormous ledgers, and the whole place smelled like old stone and older money, and Harry followed Ragnarok through it without looking at the ceiling, which he wanted to look at very badly, because he had the sense that where Ragnarok was taking him mattered more than the architecture. They went down. Not in the roller coaster mine carts Harry would come to know later. There was a private track, something lower and steadier, which Ragnarok used without comment, and they descended for what felt like a long time through levels of the vault complex that got older as they went, the stonework transitioning from smooth-cut marble to rough-dressed granite to something that looked less built than grown, as though the rock itself had been encouraged, very firmly, to become a corridor. They stopped at a door. Harry had expected a vault door, something massive and metal and covered in locks. This was not that. This was 3 doors set into the rock side by side. The left one bore the Potter crest he'd seen on a signet ring once, in a dream. The middle one was black iron with a constellation worked into it, and the star at the center of it pulsed with a faint, cold light. The right one was different. Older. The stone around it had been smoothed not by tools but by time, and the crest on it was that same open hand from the letter, but here it was carved in a material Harry couldn't name, something that wasn't quite stone and wasn't quite metal, and it was warm to look at, the way a fire is warm even across a room. "All 3, Ragnarok said, stepping back, respond to your blood. This has not happened before. Not in the history of this bank." He paused. "In the history of this world, to our knowledge." Harry looked at the doors. "What do I do?" "Touch the center of each." He touched the Potter door. Something clicked, soft and certain, like a key in a well-made lock. He touched the black door. That one was colder, it recognized him, but there was a grief in it, a long grief, and Harry felt it like a sound at the wrong pitch. He touched the Emery's door last. The warmth he'd seen in it from across the room wasn't warmth at all. It was aliveness. It was like pressing his hand to something that had been waiting for 1,500 years and had very strong opinions about the wait being over. The stone lit from within, gold and deep amber, and a sound ran through the rock of the corridor, a resonance like a word spoken in a language older than Latin, older than any tongue Harry would ever be able to name. All 3 doors swung open simultaneously. Harry walked through the Potter door first, because it was closest, and because he had to start somewhere. The Potter vault was not the richest place Harry had ever imagined. He'd never really imagined richness, because imagining things you couldn't have was a luxury the cupboard under the stairs had taught him to avoid, but the scope of it hit him like temperature change walking into shade. The coins were almost incidental. Piled in the corners, yes, stacked in the easy architectural way of things that have been accumulating for generations, but the real weight of the room was in the shelves. Books. Photographs. A locked box with James written on it in permanent marker, which was so incongruously ordinary that Harry's throat did something complicated. A glass case containing a Quidditch trophy with his father's name on it. Letters bound in ribbon. A portrait, not magical, just painted, of a woman with red hair and green eyes exactly like Harry's, holding a baby that Harry understood, without question, was himself, and smiling in a way that made the room feel like it had less oxygen in it. He stood there for a moment. Ragnarok waited in the doorway without saying anything, which was, Harry would come to understand, the most respectful thing goblins did. Then Harry noticed the letter on the central table. It was sealed with the Potter crest and addressed, in handwriting he'd never seen and somehow immediately recognized, to Harry, when you are ready. He broke the seal. Harry, if you're reading this, then the blood call worked, which means something happened to your mother and me, and you found your way to Gringotts without anyone steering you there. That alone tells me everything I need to know about the person you're becoming. I'll be quick, because there are things you need to know and I don't know how old you are when you're reading this. There is a second sealed letter from your mother in the box marked with her name. Read hers first, then come back to this. I mean it. She says things better than I do. What I need to tell you, on the night we went into hiding, your mother cast 3 spells. The first was the Fidelius, which you probably know about. The second was a blood ward keyed specifically to her sister's home, a love ward, the old kind, not the one Dumbledore told you about. There are things he changed in that story, and they matter. The third spell was a legal binding. Your mother was the brightest witch of her generation. People say that, but they don't understand what it means. She built a magical will that was, by any measure of wizarding law, airtight. You were to go to the Longbottoms. You were not to go to Petunia, whom your mother loved but understood could not raise a child in magic without it breaking something essential. The will named 3 backup guardians. Sirius Black was the first. Sirius didn't betray us. I know that the way I know you have your mother's eyes. He didn't betray us, and if he's in Azkaban, he's there because someone made sure of it. Ragnarok will have the documentation. Ask him. I love you, Harry. Your mother loves you. We both love you so much that we went to sleep holding each other and thinking of you, which is, I think, the best death any 2 people could have. Do not let anyone make you small. Dad. Harry set the letter down. He was crying. He noticed it the way you notice rain when you're already outside, not as a surprise, just as weather. He let it happen for exactly the amount of time it needed to happen, and then he picked up the letter from the box with his mother's name on it, and he read that one too, and she did say things better. She said them in a way that made him feel like she was in the room, practical and warm and absolutely ferocious in the specific way that only people who love you perfectly can be. She told him about the will. She told him about Sirius. She told him that she had suspected, in the last weeks, that something was wrong with Dumbledore's plans, and she had taken steps. The vault will tell you the rest, she wrote. The goblins keep better records than anyone. Make Ragnarok show you everything. Don't let him edit for delicacy, he'll try, because he's decent and he doesn't want to hurt you. Tell him you're ready to be hurt. It's important that you know exactly what happened. You are mine and James's, she finished. You are the best thing we ever did. Don't let anyone else define what that means. Harry folded her letter very carefully. He put both letters in the inside pocket of his too large, charity shop shirt. Then he walked out of the Potter vault and looked at Ragnarok. "I want to see everything," Harry said. "All of it. My mother said not to let you edit for delicacy." Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in the copper-colored eyes, not surprise, not pity. Something closer to respect. "Very well," the goblin said. "Come with me." They went to the Black Vault next, which was enormous and colder than the Potter Vault and full of the kind of old dark magic that pressed against the air like weather. Harry didn't touch most of it. There were tapestries and weapons and things in jars that he was relatively sure were better left alone, but there was also, on the central table, the same kind of sealed letter, this one not addressed to Harry but to the heir of the noble and most ancient house of Black, verified by blood. He broke the seal. This letter wasn't from his parents. It was from a goblin, written in the formal, precise legal language Ragnarok would later explain was standard for protective documentation, and it was a record. A record of magical guardianship assignments, vault access logs, and withdrawal histories dating back 7 years. The number that Harry found, on page 3, was 10,342,000 galleons. The name on the withdrawal orders was Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry read the page twice. He was good at numbers. He understood, in a clear and absolute way, what 10 million galleons meant, not in terms of pounds, which he'd never had many of, but in terms of the stacks of gold he'd seen in the Potter Vault, which were themselves only a portion of the whole. He understood, without sentimentality, that this was not a mistake. The withdrawal orders were methodical. Monthly. Over 7 years. Beginning, the dates confirmed, 12 days after his parents died. He looked up at Ragnarok. "He's been doing this since I was a baby." "Yes. While I was living in a cupboard." Ragnarok's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, but Harry had sharp eyes. "Yes. And nobody stopped it." "Gringotts," Ragnarok said, with the controlled precision of someone who had been building to this sentence for a very long time, was presented with guardianship documentation signed by Dumbledore and counterstamped by the Ministry of Magic. "The documents were fraudulent, we have determined this, but the fraud was executed through official channels, and our verification process at the time had a gap that has since been corrected." A pause. "There is no version of this conversation in which Gringotts is without fault. I want you to know that we are aware of it." Harry nodded. "Okay." He looked back at the ledger. "What happens to fraudulent withdrawals under wizarding law?" Ragnarok's expression did something that, on a human face, would have been the beginning of a smile. "They must be returned. With interest. Penalty interest, in cases of deliberate fraud against a minor. The rate is 10% per year, compounded." He let that settle. Over 7 years. Harry did the math. It wasn't fast math, but it wasn't slow either. That's close to 20 million galleons in total restitution. 18.7, Ragnarok confirmed. Depending on today's compound date. From Dumbledore's vaults. From Dumbledore's vaults, his Order of Merlin stipends, his Hogwarts headmaster salary, and if necessary, from assets held in his name at Gringotts. Ragnarok straightened slightly. "We would have initiated this process ourselves, had we been able to do so without your authorization. We were not. The law requires the aggrieved heir to direct proceedings." "Then I'm directing them," Harry said. "Start the process." The Emery's vault was unlike anything else underground. It didn't look like a vault. It looked like a library that had been underground for 1,000 years and had become comfortable with it. The ceiling was lost in shadow. The shelves went up farther than made architectural sense. The center of the room was clear stone, smooth as water, and in the center of that, resting on a plain wooden stand like something that expected to be picked up, was a book. Not old-looking. Organic was the better word. Bound in something that might have been leather once but had become something else with time, and the title on the cover was not printed or stamped or written. It was grown, the letters spelled out in the grain of the material itself, and they read, "For my heir, when the world has need of them again." Below the title, in smaller letters, M. Harry picked it up. The moment his hand closed on it, something ran up his arm that wasn't electricity but was the closest mundane comparison available, a full-body recognition, bone-deep and immediate, like a missing piece of something enormous clicking into place. The warmth from the door was in the book, but stronger now, and more complicated, patient, and old, and slightly exasperated in the way of someone who has been waiting for a very long time for something perfectly obvious to arrive. He opened it. The first page read, "You are 7 years old, and you are angrier than you know, and that is exactly right. Do not let them sand it down. The anger is data. Use it." Harry stared at the page. "Can it see me?" The Emery's Foundation vault has been sealed with the deepest sympathetic magic known to the Goblin Nation, Ragnarok said from behind him, and there was something in his voice that Harry had never heard from an adult before, something that might have been awe. "We did not build that vault. We were asked to maintain it. We have never seen it respond to anyone. How does it know how old I am? How do you know how old you are?" Ragnarok replied, and Harry considered that. He kept reading. The book's second page was a letter in the same voice, not a letter in the way his parents' letters were letters, full of grief and love and the specific weight of last words, but a letter in the way a map is a letter, informational and purposeful and designed to be used. "There are 3 things you need to understand before you do anything else," the book read. "The first, your blood inheritance from this line is not primarily combat magic. It is older than that. What I did, what you will be able to do, is negotiate with magic itself. Not cast it. Not perform it. Speak to it. Magic is not a tool. It is a living system. You were born knowing this. The world will try to teach you otherwise. Don't let them. The second, the people who have wronged you did so because they were afraid of exactly this. A Potter-Black-Merlin's heir is not a threat to Voldemort. A Potter-Black-Merlin's heir is a threat to the entire structure of a world that runs on fear and controlled ignorance. Be a threat to that. That's what it's for. The third thing, get a solicitor. I cannot stress this enough. The pen, in your world, remains mightier than the wand." Harry snorted. He couldn't help it. He closed the book, which let him, with a feeling like a hand gently releasing his, and turned to Ragnarok. "I need a solicitor," Harry said. "We have one retained on standby," Ragnarok said, with the satisfaction of someone who had prepared for exactly this scenario. "Her name is Madame Serena Bones. She is the sister of Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She has been waiting for this case for 4 years. Why 4 years? Because 4 years ago, she found an anomaly in your guardianship documents while reviewing an unrelated case, and she brought it to Gringotts, and we confirmed her suspicions, and she has been building a legal file ever since. She described it," Ragnarok added, "as the most comprehensive case of magical fraud against a minor in the history of British wizarding law." Harry thought about that. Then he thought about the year on the withdrawal orders. 12 days after his parents died. Then he thought about the cupboard under the stairs, and the half sandwich, and the flower beds. "Tell her I'm ready," Harry said. Madame Serena Bones arrived at Gringotts within 20 minutes of being sent for, which told Harry everything he needed to know about how seriously she was taking this. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the bearing of someone who had won arguments in every room they'd ever walked into. She came in carrying a bag that was clearly larger on the inside than the outside and sat down at Ragnarok's conference table without being asked and looked at Harry with the direct, assessing gaze of someone who was taking professional inventory. "Harry Potter," she said. "Harry Potter-Black-Merlin's," Harry said. He decided that while reading his mother's letter. Something lit up in Madame Bones's expression, professional satisfaction, the real kind. "Good. That's very good." She pulled a folder out of her bag that was nearly 3 inches thick. I'm going to tell you exactly what we have, what we can prove, and what's going to happen next. I don't speak to children differently than I speak to adults. Is that acceptable? Please, Harry said. She opened the folder. The fraudulent withdrawal orders number 47 separate instances over 7 years, beginning November 12, 1981, and continuing through July of this year. The total withdrawn is 10,342,000 galleons. In addition to the monetary fraud, the guardianship documentation presented to Gringotts and the Ministry of Magic falsified 3 elements of your mother's will. The designated guardian was changed from Sirius Black to Petunia Dursley, the blood ward clause was rewritten to suggest a familial love protection that your mother never intended and did not cast in a form described, and a provision designating magical education stipends for your early instruction was removed entirely. Harry was listening carefully. He was very good at listening. My mother's will. Can you prove it was changed? We have the original. Serena Bones looked up from the folder. Gringotts holds the notarized original of your mother's will, sealed in the vault you accessed today, and it has not been touched since November 6, 1981. 5 days before your parents died. Her voice was very even. Dumbledore's version was submitted to the ministry on November 9. 3 days after the original was sealed here. He changed it before they died, Harry said. He prepared a falsified version before they died, Madame Bones corrected carefully. We cannot prove intent at this stage. What we can prove is that 2 versions of the same document exist, with material differences, and that the version submitted to the ministry was not signed by your mother. Harry thought about the letter from his father. There are things he changed in that story, and they matter. His father had known, at the end, or suspected it. What about Sirius Black? Harry asked. Madame Bones and Ragnarok exchanged a look. That, Madame Bones said, is the part that gets significantly more serious. She pulled a second folder from her bag, thinner but somehow heavier looking. Sirius Black was convicted of the murder of 12 Muggles and Peter Pettigrew in 1981. He received a life sentence in Azkaban without trial. Harry went still. Without a trial. Without a trial, she confirmed. Which is illegal under the Wisengamot Charter of Rights, Section 14, Subsection 3. He was arrested by Aurors under orders signed by Bartemius Crouch Sr., submitted the same day without a hearing, and sent directly to Azkaban. No Veritaserum. No Wisengamot session. No legal representation. She set the folder flat. He has been in Azkaban for nearly 7 years for a crime he was never formally convicted of, through a process that violated at least 9 separate provisions of Wizarding legal code. And Dumbledore? Dumbledore was Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot in 1981. Madame Bones met Harry's eyes. He had the authority to stop it. He signed off on the expedited processing order. The room was very quiet. Harry was not the kind of child who had ever had the luxury of shock as a reaction to bad news. Bad news, in the Dursleys' house, meant adapting. It meant recalibrating and moving. He felt something very cold settle into the center of him, not rage, not grief, but something more functional than either. Clarity. I want to file charges, he said. Against Dumbledore for the monetary fraud, the will falsification, and the illegal guardianship. Simultaneously with the filing, I want Sirius Black's case reviewed for an emergency retrial or release. He looked at Ragnarok. Can Gringotts provide a writ of financial misconduct against a sitting chief warlock? Gringotts, Ragnarok said, has been waiting for 7 years to do precisely that. And can you tell me where I'm going to live after today? Because I'm not going back to Privet Drive. Ragnarok's version of a smile made a full appearance for the first time. It involved a lot of very sharp teeth and it was, despite that, genuine. Potter Manor, in Godric's Hollow, has been maintained in trust and is legally your property. It has never been entered by anyone without your family's authorization. It is warded, self-maintaining, and fully staffed by 2 house elves who have been, in your absence, exceptionally bored. He paused. They also have feelings about the situation. I'd like to meet them, Harry said. They will be thrilled, Ragnar said, in a tone that suggested thrilled didn't quite cover it. Harry nodded. He put his hands flat on the conference table and looked at Madame Bones. What do we do first? We file, she said, pulling out a quill. Then we file again. Then we file a 3rd time, and we make sure each filing goes to a different ministry department so that no single person can bury all 3 simultaneously. She uncapped the ink. And then we wait for the world to catch up. Vernon Dursley was watching the afternoon news when the letter arrived. It came through the mail slot, which the owl apparently used with no owl in sight at all, and it landed on the mat in the hallway, and something about its weight, or its existence, made the hairs on the back of Vernon's neck stand up. He picked it up. It was sealed with a crest he didn't recognize. The letter inside was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph informed Vernon Dursley, in extremely precise legal language, that his custody of one Harry James Potter had been registered as temporary pending heir verification, and that said verification had now been completed, and that his temporary custody was therefore terminated effective immediately. The second paragraph informed him that any attempt to claim, retrieve, or make contact with the aforementioned heir would be treated as a violation of Gringotts Statute 14 regarding interference with an emancipated minor under Goblin Verified Inheritance Law, and that Gringotts Wizarding Bank retained the right to pursue restitution for any and all costs incurred by the minor during his time in informal custody. Vernon read it 3 times. Then he sat down very heavily on the hallway chair. Petunia, he said. His voice came out strange. What? She called from the kitchen. He looked at the letter again. Then he put it carefully in his pocket and decided, with the particular cowardice of a man who has always chosen comfort over confrontation, not to say anything at all. Upstairs, the smallest bedroom, the real one, not the cupboard, was untouched. No one had used it. It smelled like clean sheets and dust. Across London, in a set of goblin-warded rooms at the top of Gringotts, Harry Potter-Black-Merlin was eating a proper meal for the first time he could remember, while Ragnar went through documents and Madame Bones wrote filings and the book from the Emery's vault sat on the table next to his plate, radiating that deep, patient warmth. He was eating and reading the book simultaneously, which was something Aunt Petunia would have called rude, and was, under the circumstances, exactly what he felt like doing. The book, for its part, seemed pleased about this. Outside the windows of Gringotts, Diagon Alley went about its business in the afternoon light, entirely unaware that something had just shifted in the foundation of the world that was built on top of it. In his office at Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore stopped mid-sentence during a meeting with Minerva McGonagall, looking suddenly at nothing, his hand going to the desk as though he needed steadying. He wasn't sure what he'd felt. Some deep magical notification, something beneath wards, something at the level of old blood magic and older contracts. Something, some very fundamental something, had just changed. He composed himself within a breath and continued the conversation. His face showed nothing. But his hand, flat on the desk, pressed down harder than it needed to. That night, Harry slept in the Gringotts guest rooms on a bed that was, without any contest, the best surface he had ever lain on in his life. He had a stomach full of real food. He had both his parents' letters in his shirt pocket. He had the Emery's book on the nightstand. Before he closed his eyes, he opened it one more time, not to any particular page, just held it, the way you'd hold someone's hand. The page it fell open to read, "Sleep now. Tomorrow, the real work begins. You are not alone. You never were." That was the lie they needed you to believe. Harry closed the book and lay back and looked at the ceiling of the goblin guest room, which was high and plain and absolutely nothing like the underside of a cupboard stair. He was 7 years old. He had no wand, no formal magical education, and had spent the entirety of his life being told, in 100 small ways, that he was nothing. He was, he thought, going to be okay. More than okay. The pull in his chest, that blood call, whatever it was, the thread that had led him here, was quiet now. Not gone. Settled. Like something that had done its job and was resting. Harry closed his eyes. He slept dreamlessly, for the first time in as long as he could remember. Chapter 2, The weight of names. Potter Manor did not announce itself. That was the first thing Harry noticed when the goblin portkey deposited him at the gate the next morning. It didn't perform. The houses he'd seen on Privet Drive all had that quality of straining, each one trying to outneat the next, the carefully edged lawns and the matching curtains and the competitive flower baskets. Potter Manor sat at the edge of Godric's Hollow behind a low stone wall covered in something that was either very old ivy or something that had decided to become ivy over time, and it looked like a place that had absolutely nothing to prove. It was large. 3 stories, old stone, a garden that was overgrown in a way that suggested intention rather than neglect. The windows caught the morning light without showing anything through them, which gave the whole facade a watchful quality, like the house was deciding about him. Then the front door opened by itself, and 2 house elves appeared on the front step, and any sense of the house being measured was replaced immediately by the very specific energy of 2 small beings who had been waiting a long time and were not going to waste another second of it. The first one was about 2 feet tall, with enormous amber eyes and ears that stood straight up and a tea towel knotted at the waist like a perfectly chosen accessory. She was vibrating with barely contained feeling. "Master Harry," she said, in a voice that managed to be both very small and very large simultaneously. "Pip has been keeping the house. Pip has been keeping everything ready. Pip has been," she stopped, because her voice did something irregular, and she took a breath. "You look like your father about the hair," she said. "But you have her eyes." Harry looked at her. "You knew them." "Pip was with the family since Master James was 11, she said. "And Dob has been here since before that." She gestured at the second house elf, who was older looking, rounder, with the air of someone who had seen a great deal and chosen deliberate calm about most of it. Dob inclined his head at Harry with the gravity of a proper introduction. "Master Harry," Dob said. "The wards recognize you. The house has been ready since November 1st, 1981. We did not know it would take this long." He paused. "We are glad you are here." Harry looked at both of them and then at the open door, which showed warm light and wood floors and a hallway full of the kind of accumulated life that belonged to people who actually lived somewhere. He thought about the Dursley house. He thought about how even the guest bedroom at the Dursleys, Dudley's second room, full of broken toys, had always felt like a space that wasn't configured for him. This felt configured for him. The house felt configured for him. As though it had been waiting, with the same quality as the Emery's book, patient and certain. "Thank you," Harry said to Pip and Dob, because they deserved that. "For keeping it ready." Pip made a sound that was not crying and also definitely was, just very briefly, and then pulled herself together with magnificent speed. "Breakfast," she said decisively. "Then Master Harry will see the house." Then, she glanced at Dob. "The training room," Dob said. "Master James left instructions." Harry stopped walking. "A training room?" "Your father was a very practical man," Dob said, in a way that managed to be both fond and amused. "Come." Breakfast was porridge with actual cream and honey, toast with good butter, eggs cooked properly, and a glass of cold pumpkin juice that Harry drank entirely too fast and then looked at with a sort of reverence. Pip watched him eat with the focused attention of someone running quality control, and refilled things before he could ask, and Harry thought that this specific ordinary domestic thing of having enough food, having someone offer more without making it feel like charity or weakness, was, quietly, one of the most significant experiences of his life so far. He didn't say that out loud. He filed it under things that mattered and kept eating. Madame Bones arrived while he was on his second glass of juice. She came through the Manor's floor looking as brisk as she had yesterday, her bag even more alarming in its capacity, and she sat across from Harry at the kitchen table and spread papers out without preamble. "We've been busy," she said, by way of greeting. So have I, Harry said, which was true. He'd been up since 5 reading the Emery's book, which had very specific things to say about the foundations of wizarding law and, tangentially, about the particular kind of power that came from understanding a system better than the people running it. Madam Bones looked at him over her reading glasses. The filings went in at midnight. Gringotts timestamps everything. We submitted the monetary fraud case to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the will falsification to the Whisked Office of Estate Affairs, and the illegal guardianship complaint to the Department of Child Welfare. She sorted 3 separate stacks of paper. Each department received an independent submission. None of them know about the others yet. Who handles the black case? That one, she said, pulling a thicker folder to the front, went directly to Amelia. My sister. She's the only person in the DMLE I trust with it. Her voice was very level. She received it at midnight. She has confirmed receipt. I expect we'll hear from her this morning. Harry nodded. And Dumbledore? Does he know yet? He knows something. Madam Bones looked at him steadily. The guardianship termination notice went to the Ministry as part of the standard Gringotts inheritance processing. That's not a secret, it's a matter of public record. He will have been notified, as a person of interest in your previous guardianship, within the normal administrative timeline. She paused. Which means he likely knows that you've accessed the vaults and that your guardianship status has changed. He does not yet know the scope of what we've filed. How long before he does? If he's paying attention. She straightened her glasses. Today. Harry picked up his juice. Good. Madam Bones looked at him for a moment with an expression he was getting better at reading. It was the expression adults got when he said something that surprised them, but surprised them positively, like they'd been expecting something smaller. He'd seen it on Ragnar's face multiple times yesterday. He didn't know exactly what they expected of a 7-year-old boy, but he suspected it was something quieter. He wasn't interested in being quiet. His mother's letter had been very clear about that. There's something else, Madam Bones said. She pulled a separate sheet from the very back of her bag, not from a folder, just on its own, which he was starting to understand was her way of indicating that something was either recent or important enough to not yet be categorized. A legal provision in your mother's will that I didn't fully explain yesterday, because I wanted to confirm it with Ragnar first. She set it down. Harry read it. Then he read the particular section she'd underlined. His mother, in addition to everything else she'd done in that will, had included a clause that invoked a doctrine of wizarding law called Emancipatio Magica, magical emancipation, applicable to an heir who could demonstrate verified inheritance of a legacy estate and who was subject to conditions of magical neglect in their current guardianship. The clause, if invoked, would grant Harry the full legal standing of a Whisked adult, regardless of age. She built me an exit, Harry said. She built you several exits, Madam Bones confirmed. Your mother was extraordinarily thorough. She appears to have anticipated that whoever handled your placement might not have your best interests in mind. A pause. And she was not wrong. Can we invoke it? Ragnar is preparing the documentation. The Emery's vault records are the decisive factor. The Emery's bloodline has a standing precedent for early emancipation dating back to the 10th century, when a 12-year-old heir of the line invoked it against the magical guardianship of a corrupt regional court. Your case is arguably stronger, given the verified fraud. She folded her hands on the table. I believe a Whisked application would succeed. The question is timing. Do we invoke it before or after the fraud case becomes public? Harry thought about that. Not for long. Before. If I'm emancipated, no one can try to reassign my guardianship or argue that Dumbledore acted in loco parentis with legitimate authority. It removes their most obvious defensive argument. He looked at her. Right? The expression again. You are quite right, she said. I'll have Ragnar file this afternoon. The training room was in the east wing, behind a door that was warmer than the surrounding stone, the same quality as the emery's vault, that aliveness, though quieter here, like a banked fire rather than an open one. Dob opened it and stepped back without explaining, which told Harry the explanation was inside. It was a long room with high ceilings and walls lined with a material Harry didn't recognize. It wasn't stone and it wasn't wood, and it absorbed sound in a way that made the room feel separate from the rest of the house. The floor was clear. In the center of the room there was a single piece of furniture, a practice stand, the kind used for wand drills, except modified with no place for a wand. On the wall opposite the door, a framed note in his father's handwriting: "Harry, if you're here, you found the vault, which means you figured out more about your situation than we hoped you wouldn't have to know this young. The training room is keyed to your blood. It responds to intent, not technique. Don't try to control it. Just be specific about what you want. The room will do the rest. Start with fire. Everyone starts with fire. Dad. P.S. Your mother wants me to add, the room has a medical kit in the left cabinet and it restocks itself. This is because your father never started with fire without eventually needing it." "Mum." Harry laughed. It surprised him. The laugh came out real and sudden, the kind that happens before you decide whether to let it. He clapped a hand over his mouth, not from embarrassment but from the surprise of it, and then he put his hand down because there was no one here to be embarrassed in front of except himself. He stood in the center of the room. He thought about fire. Not abstractly, specifically. He thought about what fire looked like, the shape of it, the dynamic between heat and air and fuel, the color progression from blue at the base to orange at the tip, the way it moved. The room lit up. Not dangerously. Not uncontrolled. A ring of clean, controlled flame about a foot high circling the perimeter of the room at floor level, adjusting itself as he adjusted his attention, dimming and brightening as his focus wavered and sharpened. When he thought about a single point of flame, it concentrated there. When he let his attention spread, it spread. No wand. No incantation. He was 7 years old and hadn't been to a day of magical instruction, and the fire did exactly what he thought at it. He spent the better part of an hour in there, testing things. Not fire specifically, he moved through fire quickly because fire was dramatic but limited, and what interested him more was the quality of the room's response. It was his intent that drove it, not the intent to do magic, but the intent to accomplish something specific. He thought about light, and there was light. He thought about the concept of a wall, and the air in front of him became resistant in a way that his hand, pressed against it, confirmed was actually solid. He thought about the feeling he'd had in the emery's vault, that full-body recognition, that click of something fitting, and the room went very still and then very bright, not with fire but with a light that didn't have a source, that seemed to come from the material of the room itself. Dob knocked on the door. "Madam Bones, sir. The flu. Your presence is requested." Harry let the light go and rolled his shoulders and walked back through the manor, feeling like something that had been slightly too tight around his edges had loosened. Amelia Bones was in the sitting room, and she was not alone. She was her sister's height, with the same close-cropped hair but darker, and the bearing of someone who ran one of the ministry's more difficult departments and made it look less difficult than it was. She was sitting across from a woman Harry didn't recognize, lean, very straight posture, blonde hair with the kind of precision that suggested intention, dark eyes that took him in from head to foot the moment he walked into the room. The stranger looked at Harry and then said, with no particular ceremony, "You're smaller than I expected." "Most people are," Harry said, which was technically true if you adjusted for expectations. Something moved through the woman's expression quickly, surprise, then something that might have been amusement, then professional neutrality. "Narcissa Malfoy," she said. "I've come on a matter separate from whatever my sister-in-law is here about." She glanced at Amelia Bones. "Though it seems our business may overlap." Harry looked at Amelia Bones. Amelia Bones looked back at him with the expression of someone who had also not expected the morning to go this way. "Sirius Black," Amelia said. "I reviewed the file Serena sent me. All of it. I pulled the original arrest records at 6 this morning. She set a folder on the table between them. There was no trial. Not an expedited one. Not a closed one. There was an arrest order, a processing form, and a transfer warrant. In the space where trial records would be filed, there is a form that reads, waived under wartime emergency provisions. The signature on the waiver is Bartemius Crouch Sr.'s. The counter-signature authorizing the emergency provision is Albus Dumbledore's. Harry sat down in the armchair across from her. Dumbledore signed away Sirius's right to a trial. Dumbledore counter-authorized the emergency provision that allowed Crouch to process Sirius without one, Amelia corrected, but her tone said that the distinction was largely technical. The legal effect is the same. What does that mean for getting him out? It means, Amelia said, that the procedural violation is clear enough that I can issue a review order today, without going through the full Wisengamot. I can have Sirius transferred from Azkaban to Ministry custody for re-evaluation within 48 hours. The question is what happens after that. She glanced at Narcissa Malfoy. Which is, I think, where your unexpected guest comes in. Harry looked at Narcissa. She had the quality of someone who had made a very considered decision and was not second-guessing it but was watching carefully to see if the room warranted the trust she was extending. You're Sirius's cousin, Harry said. Not a question, the black family tapestry in the vault had been illuminating. I am, she said. And I am also, for reasons that would take longer than I think we have this morning, someone who would benefit from Sirius Black being free, sane, and in possession of his legal faculties. She folded her hands in her lap. My husband's family has positioned itself in a way that I would prefer, for my son's sake, to step away from. Sirius, as the head of the Black family, has certain legal powers regarding family branch realignments. He could, if he chose, separate the Malfoy branch from the Black family tree in a way that would give me and Draco independent legal standing. And in exchange? Harry asked. Information, Narcissa said simply. I know things about the Death Eater network, about the plans Lucius has been involved in, and about several ministry officials who have been on the wrong payroll for years. I have been composing a very detailed document for some time now. I will give it to your solicitor, in exchange for Sirius's cooperation on the family matter once he's free. A pause. I want my son to have options that don't involve kneeling to a dead man's memory. The room was quiet for a moment. Amelia Bones was watching Harry with the specific attention of someone who was professionally obligated to assess the situation and was also personally curious how a 7-year-old was going to handle it. Harry thought about the Emery's book. The pen is mightier than the wand. He thought about Narcissa Malfoy coming here, alone, to a meeting she couldn't have known would include the head of magical law enforcement. He thought about what that said about how isolated she'd already decided she was from the people around her. Do you have the document with you? Harry asked. A very small pause. Parts of it. Give us the parts you have, Harry said. My solicitor will review them. If what you're offering is substantive, I'll make sure Sirius understands your position before you ever have to ask him directly. That way if he says no, you haven't exposed yourself unnecessarily. He met her eyes. That seems safer for you. The look Narcissa Malfoy gave him then was the same one he'd seen on Ragnarok and Madame Bones, but different in texture. Theirs had been surprise at his competence, hers was something older and more guarded, the look of someone recalibrating a fundamental assumption. All right, she said. After Narcissa left and Amelia Bones had her flood back to the ministry with the transfer order already being drafted, Serena Bones sat down across from Harry with a cup of tea and the expression of someone who had been managing her reactions all morning and was giving herself 10 minutes of honesty. She came to you, Serena said. Not to the ministry, not to Dumbledore, not to any adult. She came to you. Is that strange? It is extremely strange, Serena said. Narcissa Malfoy is one of the more politically shrewd people in Wizarding Britain. The fact that she chose to come here rather than go to an established power center suggests she's already concluded that the established power centers are unsafe. She sipped her tea. And possibly that you aren't. Is she right? About you being safe? Serena considered. You're 7 years old and you've spent the last 18 hours systematically dismantling the legal architecture of the most powerful man in British wizarding society. I think safe is relative. She set down her cup. What I can tell you is that her information, if it's what she implied, could be extremely valuable to the fraud and will falsification cases. Several of those ministry officials she mentioned will have been involved in processing Dumbledore's guardianship documents. Harry picked up his own tea. Pip had brought it in without being asked, which he was already taking as the baseline domestic standard. There's something I've been thinking about, he said. The fraud charges are straightforward, the documents exist, the withdrawal records exist. But the will falsification case is going to need something more. More than 2 copies of the same document with material differences? More than that, yes. Because Dumbledore is going to say he was acting in Harry's best interest. He's going to say the will he submitted was based on conversations with my parents that superseded the written document. He's going to say my mother changed her mind. Harry set down his tea. He's going to say he was protecting me. Serena Bones was very still. That is almost certainly exactly what he'll say. So we need to establish, specifically and on record, that the conditions I lived in did not constitute protection. And we need witnesses. He looked at her. Can you depose the Dursleys? We can compel their testimony, yes. Good. Because the house on Privet Drive had a cupboard under the stairs with a child-sized mattress in it. He said it very evenly. That is where I slept until I was old enough to be put in a proper bedroom. I have never told anyone that before. I'm telling you now so that you can decide what to do with it. Serena Bones put down her teacup very carefully. She looked at Harry for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was precise and controlled, which he was already understanding was what she did instead of something else. I will be filing an additional complaint, she said. Under the Statute of Wizarding Child Protection, which the Ministry is legally required to investigate independently of the fraud and will cases. Okay, Harry said. Harry. She said his name differently than she'd said anything else, and he looked at her directly. I am very sorry this happened to you. He thought about deflecting it. He thought about the number of times adults had expressed something in the vicinity of sympathy for his situation and then done nothing with it. He decided that Serena Bones was not in that category, based on available evidence. I know, he said. So let's make sure it matters. The Emery's book had chapters. He discovered this on the second night in Potter Manor, sitting in the study that had been his father's and still smelled like old parchment and some kind of wood smoke cologne that he recognized from the edge of his earliest dreams, the ones he'd never been able to hold on to in the mornings. The study had a desk and shelves and a comfortable chair and a fire that Pip had lit without being asked, and Harry sat in the chair with his feet tucked under him and the book in his lap. The chapters were not titled in any conventional sense. They were organized by concept, and the concepts did not follow any logical pedagogical sequence he could identify, they moved, he came to understand, according to what he needed rather than any predetermined order. The chapter he found himself in now was titled, in the same grain-spelled letters as the cover, The Language of Magic. It read the way a very smart teacher talked, not the way textbooks talked, not the stiff formal phrasing of incantations or vocalizations of magical intent encoded in linguistic patterns, but the way a person who had lived inside magic for a very long time talked about it to someone they expected would understand. Magic, the chapter said, is not neutral. This is the thing the current curriculum gets profoundly wrong, and has gotten wrong for about 400 years since a series of ministry reforms standardized wand-based casting and deprecated the older traditions. Magic has preference. It has aesthetic. It responds to alignment, not moral alignment in the simplistic sense, but alignment of purpose, specificity, and what I can only call honesty. Magic knows when you're pretending. You've noticed this already, the chapter continued, and Harry, reading it alone in the firelit study, had the distinct sensation of being in a conversation. The training room. You didn't cast spells. You didn't perform. You were specific about what you wanted, and you were honest about it, and the magic responded accordingly. This is not unique to you, this is how magic works for everyone, under the surface of wand technique and incantation. But most people spend their lives working at the surface level. You don't have to. The Emery's inheritance is not a power upgrade, the chapter explained. Think of it less like a stronger wand and more like fluency. When you speak to magic directly, when you make your intent specific and honest and grounded in genuine understanding, you are not casting a spell. You are having a conversation. And magic, in my experience, is an excellent conversationalist once you stop shouting at it. There are things this fluency cannot do, it continued, with the quality of a genuine caution rather than a caveat. It cannot make you invulnerable. It cannot substitute for emotional intelligence, which you will need rather more of than raw power in the years ahead. It cannot protect the people you love without their own will and power being part of the equation. And it can absolutely be misused. Fluency in any language can be used to lie. The difference between a persuader and a manipulator is often only intent, and magic, as I said, knows when you're pretending. Don't pretend. Harry closed the book on that chapter and sat with the fire for a while. He thought about Dumbledore. He thought about what the book had just described, the difference between someone who used magic honestly and someone who used it as a tool of management. He thought about a man who had redirected 10 million galleons from an orphaned infant over 7 years and apparently had entirely convinced himself it was in service of something larger. He believes he's right, Harry thought. That was the part that the book was telling him to take seriously. Not Dumbledore's power, not his influence, not his legal maneuvering ability, the fact that the man looked at what he'd done and saw strategy rather than theft. That was, actually, the most dangerous thing about him. Harry opened the book again to a new page, a page that hadn't been there the last time he looked. The book did this, added pages when they were relevant, and this one read, exactly. Now you understand the fight you're actually in. On the third day, the letter arrived. Not from Dumbledore. Harry had half expected something from Dumbledore, some overture, some attempt at early contact dressed up as concern. Instead the letter was from Hogwarts. Not the castle, the Board of Governors, specifically from a governor named Griselda Marchbanks, who turned out to be a small, ancient woman of considerable reputation in the field of magical examinations and apparently no patience whatsoever for procedural nonsense. She had reviewed the Gringotts filing on the Potter estate, which had been submitted to the board as a matter of courtesy by Ragnarok, and she had a question. Mr. Potter-Black-Merlin, the letter read, in handwriting so crisp it could have been typeset, I am informed that you are 7 years of age and currently unregistered with the Hogwarts intake list. I am also informed that the Hogwarts headmaster is under active investigation for matters pertaining to your welfare. Under the circumstances, I would appreciate a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss the board's position. I should tell you, she added, in a smaller postscript, that I examined your grandfather Fleamont Potter for his OWLs in 1938, and his results were impressive. Your grandmother's results were more impressive still. I mention this not to create pressure, but to tell you that you come from people who took their education seriously, and I think you should have one. Harry wrote back the same day, Dear Madam Marchbanks, I am available Thursday morning. Please bring anyone from the board you trust. My solicitor will be present. I can also offer tea, which my house elf informs me is very good. He sent it with Pip, who returned looking extremely pleased about being a messenger. On Thursday morning, Griselda Marchbanks arrived at Potter Manor with 2 other governors and a briefcase full of educational assessment records, drank the tea, declared it was indeed very good, and spent 3 hours testing Harry informally on a range of subjects. She was not subtle about her conclusions. Your practical magic is extraordinary and your formal knowledge is gaps and peaks, she said, when she'd finished. Which is exactly what I'd expect from a child who has been accessing his innate ability without any curriculum to organize it around. She folded her testing materials away. You should be at Hogwarts in 4 years. I should be at Hogwarts eventually, Harry agreed. Whether Dumbledore is still headmaster when I arrive is a separate question. Marchbanks looked at him over her glasses with an expression that Harry was getting quite good at, that recalibration look. The board, she said carefully, does not control the headmaster's appointment. That falls under ministry purview. The board controls the school's charter, Harry said. He had read the Hogwarts governance documents, which Serena Bones had provided as part of his general legal education. And the school's charter has a clause, subsection 9, I think, of the original founding compact, that allows the governors to request a ministry review of any senior staff member if the welfare of current or enrolled students is materially at risk. He looked at her. I'm an enrolled student. I've been on the list since I was 1 year old. The material risk to my welfare, as documented, is extensive. Griselda Marchbanks was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, to the governor on her left, I told you he would be interesting. The governor on her left, a round-faced man named Philo Doge who had been very quiet throughout the meeting, said, You did say that, yes. I'll review the subsection, Marchbanks said to Harry. And I will want copies of your solicitor's filings. Serena will send them this afternoon, Harry said. That evening, standing in the training room with the fire running in its quiet circle and the Emery's book open on the practice stand, Harry felt something shift. Not in the room. In himself. It was subtle. The Emery's inheritance didn't come with fanfare, he was coming to understand, it came with depth, with layers of ability that revealed themselves through use rather than announcement. He'd been working for 3 days on the very basic principle the book had explained, honest communication with magic, rather than performance of it. He'd been practicing in here because the room's response was honest too, it didn't flatter his intent, it reflected it, so if he was sloppy or unfocused or, yes, pretending, the room showed him. Tonight he wasn't pretending about anything. He stood in the center of the room and thought about the documentation Serena Bones was building. He thought about Sirius Black in Azkaban, 7 years of Dementors and cold stone. He thought about his mother writing a will with perfect precision and someone taking it and changing it with a pen. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs, which he was aware he thought about more often than he'd like. He thought, I want to be the thing that stops this from happening again. Not just to me. To anyone. The room went quiet in a way that wasn't absence of sound but presence of something else. The fire settled into a low ring and everything in the room went still, and Harry felt the warmth from the Emery's book from across the room, stronger now than he'd felt it before, and something in the magic of the room and the magic in his blood and the magic in the book met in the space around him like 3 rivers meeting. He could feel the wards of the house. Not see them, feel them, the way you can feel sunlight on your arm through a window without seeing light as a thing. He could feel where they were strong and where they were aging and where, if someone pushed hard in exactly the right spot, they might give a little. He adjusted one without consciously deciding to, just felt the gap and felt it close, the way you balance without thinking when you step on uneven ground. He stood there breathing for a while. Then Dob knocked on the door. Master Harry. Fleur. Director Ragnarok. Harry let the feeling settle and walked back through the house. Ragnarok's face in the flue was as composed as always, but something behind his copper eyes was sharp with news. 2 developments, the goblin said, without preamble. The first, Dumbledore has filed an opposition to the emancipation application. He has submitted testimony to the Wisengamot Office of Estate Affairs claiming that he acted as a de facto parental guardian with the full informed consent of your parents, and that the conditions at your aunt's home, while imperfect, were legally adequate and intentionally chosen as a protective measure. Harry had expected this. He'd said as much to Serena. And the second? The second, Ragnarok said, and now there was something in his expression that Harry couldn't quite read, not suppressed emotion exactly but something contained with considerable effort, is that the Daily Prophet has received an anonymous tip regarding your situation. A reporter named Rita Skeeter has been asking questions at the ministry since this morning. She has not yet published. He paused. She will. Harry thought about that. Is that bad? It is, Ragnock said carefully, a variable. What if I made it not a variable? Harry said. What if I contacted her first? The silence on the other end of the floor was very brief. That would be, Ragnock said, strategically sound, depending on execution. Skeeter is sensationalist by nature. She will frame any story to maximize impact. If you speak to her before she frames it herself, you control the initial framing. I want to be the source, Harry said. Not the subject. There's a difference. He thought for a moment. Also, does she take photographs for her stories? She uses a photographer, yes. Tell her I'll give her an exclusive interview and a photograph. Harry looked at the fire next to the flue. But the photograph will be taken here, at Potter Manor, and I get approval on what's used. He paused. If she's going to write about the boy who lived finally coming home, it should look like home. Ragnock looked at him for 3 full seconds. I will send the message, he said. After the flue closed, Harry sat by the fire and pulled out his parents' letters again, not to read, just to hold. He'd read them enough times now that the words were inside him rather than on the paper, but there was something in the physical weight of them, the reality of the handwriting, that he needed sometimes. His father had said, do not let anyone make you small. His mother had said, you are mine and James's. You are the best thing we ever did. Don't let anyone else define what that means. In the morning, the Daily Prophet would have the story. Not Dumbledore's story, not the ministry's story, not the story of a mysterious orphan boy living quietly with his Muggle relatives for reasons of safety and sacrifice. The real story. Harry put the letters away carefully. He looked at the room around him, the shelves, the photographs, the fire, the desk where his father had worked and read and thought. I'm working on it, he said, to no one in both of them. The fire crackled. Somewhere upstairs, Pip was doing something domestic and thoroughgoing in the way of someone who had been waiting for a household to look after for 7 years. Outside the manor's windows, Godric's Hollow was quiet and dark. And in London, in the prophet's offices, a reporter's quill was about to run out of other people's stories to write. Chapter 3, The World Notices the Daily Prophet hit doorsteps at 6:30 in the morning. Rita Skeeter had, Harry would later acknowledge, done exactly what she'd said she would do. She'd taken the story and run with it, which was her nature, but she'd run in the direction he'd pointed her. The photograph on the front page was the one Harry had approved, him sitting in his father's study chair, the Emery's book closed on the desk beside him, looking directly at the camera with the particular quality of someone who has absolutely nothing to hide and is, in fact, waiting for you to try something. Pip had suggested the chair. Harry thought she had good instincts. The headline read, The Boy Who Lived, and What He Came Home To. Below it, in slightly smaller type, Gringotts confirms Potter-Black-Merlin's vault activation. 10 million galleons missing. The questions nobody asked. Harry read it at the kitchen table over breakfast, and Skeeter had been thorough, whatever her faults, and they were apparently numerous according to Serena Bones, who had provided a brief professional dossier. She knew how to write a story that pulled. She'd used the vault documents Gringotts had authorized for publication. She'd quoted Ragnock directly, which was apparently unprecedented in Prophet history, a Goblin Bank director going on record. She'd included the detail about the will. She had not, at Harry's specific request, included anything about Sirius Black yet. That story needed to land separately. The last line of the article read, Harry Potter Black-Merlin, age 7, is living at Potter Manor in Godric's Hollow. He declined to comment on whether he felt he had been failed by the wizarding world. His expression, when asked, answered for him. Harry folded the paper and ate his toast. The flue started going at 7. The first call was Ragnock, who said the Gringotts main branch had received 43 owls in the first hour, ranging from journalist inquiries to letters from members of the Wisingamot to 3 separate requests from ministry departments. He was handling them in the order of their legal relevance, which put journalists last and the Wisingamot second, after the fraud case correspondence. The second call was Amelia Bones, who said, in the focused tone of someone reporting from a battlefield, that the DMLE had been contacted by the minister's office asking for a briefing on the fraud case, that 2 junior Aurors had been sent to the minister's office asking, specifically, about the Black case processing records, and that Cornelius Fudge had apparently said the words, "This is a very bad morning," to his secretary 3 times before 9 o'clock. The third call was Serena Bones, who had been at her office since 5 and said that the Wisengamot Office of Estate Affairs had formally acknowledged the will falsification filing, that the emancipation application had been expedited as a result of what was being described internally as significant public interest, and that Dumbledore's opposition filing was being treated as a conflict of interest document pending the fraud case review, which meant it had been, effectively, set aside. "He tried to stop the emancipation," Harry said. "He tried," Serena confirmed. "The committee chair read the prophet this morning, same as everyone else." "Good," Harry said. "Then, when will I hear about Sirius?" "Amelia believes she can have the transfer order processed by end of day," Serena said. "There's a complication, however. The transfer requires authorization from the current Azkaban Oversight Board, and 2 of the 3 board members have, not coincidentally, taken today as an unexpected holiday." Harry thought about that. "Is that Fudge or Dumbledore?" "We don't know yet. Possibly both, with different reasons." Serena paused. "The 3rd board member, who has not taken a holiday, is a woman named Griselda Marchbanks." Harry smiled. "Of course it is." By noon, Diagon Alley had the quality of a place where the ground had shifted and nobody could quite agree on how far. Harry knew this because he went there, because staying in the manor and waiting for the world to react to itself was not something he was willing to do, and because he needed to be seen, specifically, as someone going about their business in broad daylight. He went with Dobb, who was small enough to not attract attention and old enough to have the air of someone who had navigated Diagon Alley through considerably worse than public attention. They walked in from the Leaky Cauldron end, and Harry was aware, within about 30 seconds, that he was being recognized. It happened in stages. First the double takes, people clocking his face, clocking his eyes, the famous eyes, the ones that matched the photograph in the morning paper. Then the stilling, conversations going quieter, people touching each other's arms. Then the range of responses, which was wide. Some people looked at him with the open, uncomplicated warmth of people who'd loved his parents, some with the complicated expression of people who'd read the paper and weren't sure what to do with it, and some with the particular shuttered blankness of people who had a position to maintain and didn't want Harry Potter-Black-Merlin to read it on their face. He nodded at people who nodded at him, and he didn't slow down, and he didn't perform anything. He just walked. It was, he found, remarkably effective. He stopped at Flourish and Blots because he needed books, specifically books on wizarding law, the history of the Wisengamot, and advanced magical theory, because the Emery's book was excellent but specific, and he needed context. The shop assistant was a young man who went slightly pink when Harry came in and then gathered himself and helped Harry efficiently and well, which Harry appreciated. He was reaching for a volume on 19th-century Wisengamot structural reforms when a voice behind him said, "That one's actually quite boring. The appendix is good but the main text is about 40% padding." Harry turned around. The girl was roughly his age, perhaps a year older, with large, somewhat frizzy hair and the kind of serious expression that books give to people who spend a lot of time reading them. She was holding 3 volumes already, all of them thick, and she was looking at the book Harry was reaching for with the direct appraisal of someone who had strong opinions about book quality and didn't see any reason to keep them to herself. "What's better?" Harry asked. She thought for approximately half a second, then pointed to a slim dark green volume on the shelf above. "Perkins is a Practical History of Wizarding Legal Structure, 3rd edition. The 19th century section is comprehensive and it's written like an actual human being instead of someone trying to sound like a document." She paused. "I'm Hermione Granger. I'm Muggle-born. I got my letter 3 weeks ago and I've been in here every day since." "Harry Potter-Black-Merlin," Harry said. Hermione Granger did not go pink and she did not still in the way people did when they recognized the name. She processed it with the expression of someone cross-referencing, and then, because she had clearly read the prophet that morning and had a very good memory and was not going to pretend she hadn't, she said, "The vault story. That's you." "Yes." "Is it true? About the 10 million galleons?" 10,342,000, Harry said. "Yes." She looked at him very directly, the way people with very good minds look at things they're deciding what to think about. "That's awful," she said. "And I mean, if the will documentation is what the article said, it's also very clearly illegal. Does your solicitor have the original documents?" "Yes." "And the withdrawal ledgers?" "Also yes." "Then the case is straightforward," she said, with the confidence of someone who had been reading wizarding law for 3 weeks and had strong feelings about logical conclusions. "Fraud with documented evidence is fraud. The question is whether the system wants to prosecute it." "That," Harry said, "is exactly the question." She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned back to the shelves. "There's also a very good volume on ancient bloodline law, the kind that covers inheritance trusts and the Emery's precedents, if you're building a legal case around the emancipation provision. Second shelf from the bottom, far right." Harry found it. He added it to his stack. "Are you in here by yourself?" "My parents are at Gringotts doing currency exchange," she said. "I have 30 minutes. She added a 4th book to her own stack without looking away from the shelf. "The article made you seem very composed for a 7-year-old. 7-year-olds don't have a monopoly on composure," Harry said. Something changed in her expression, the professional evaluation relaxed slightly into something more genuine. "No," she agreed. "They really don't." She turned to look at him properly. "Can I ask, the Emery's vault? The article only mentioned that it had been sealed since the 6th century. What was in it?" "Books," Harry said. "And information. And something my solicitor called the most legally binding set of ancient inheritance protections in recorded wizarding history." "Merlin's vault," Hermione said, and her voice had gone slightly reverent in spite of itself. "I read about the Emery's bloodline in Mythological Bloodlines of Magical Britain. It's in the back corner under history, and the theory is that the Emery's line had access to what scholars call foundational magic. Not spells. The actual," she stopped herself, like she was editing for concision. "Like the root system that spells grow from." "That's a good description," Harry said. She looked at him sharply. "You've already been reading about it." "The book explains it from the inside," Harry said. The sharpness became something else entirely. "There's a book," she stopped again, with considerable visible effort. "I'm sorry. That's your private inheritance and I'm being nosy." "You're being precise," Harry said, which was different. "I don't mind precise." She seemed to decide something. "If you ever want to, not that I'm going to be at Hogwarts in 4 years and you presumably will be as well, and I'm planning to be very well prepared, and if you wanted to share research at some point that would be," she appeared to feel she was not presenting this well. "I'm good at research," she said, more simply. "I know," Harry said. "I can tell." He picked up the Perkins volume. "I'll be here Thursday. If you wanted to." She considered this with appropriate seriousness and then nodded once, with the air of someone confirming a practical arrangement. "Thursday," she said. They paid for their books at separate tills and left in separate directions, and Harry, walking back through Diagon Alley with Dobb at his side, felt something that he didn't have a name for yet, the specific warmth of finding, entirely accidentally, someone who operated on a compatible frequency. He filed it in the category of things that mattered. They came at 3 in the afternoon. 2 aurors, in full ministry robes, who operate to the manor gates with the specific energy of people who had been given an assignment they either didn't fully understand or didn't fully agree with. Harry watched them from the front window while Pip went to the gate with the impeccable bearing of a house elf who knew exactly what the wards allowed and what they didn't. The lead auror, young, brown-skinned, with a jaw set at the angle of someone being professionally careful, identified himself as Auror Kingsley Shacklebolt. His partner was shorter, older, with the look of someone counting down to retirement. "We're here to speak with Harry Potter," Shacklebolt said to Pip. "Master Harry is in," Pip said. "The wards require authorization. Please state the purpose of your visit." "We have a request from the minister's office," Shacklebolt said. "For a welfare check and a courtesy consultation." "A courtesy consultation," Pip repeated, in the tone of someone deciding what to do with a politely worded lie. Harry had been listening. He came to the door. He looked at Kingsley Shacklebolt directly and Shacklebolt looked back, and in his expression Harry saw something that wasn't a ministry functionary doing a minister's errand, it was something more complicated than that. Shacklebolt looked at him the way people sometimes looked at situations where they were doing one thing while thinking something else entirely. "Auror Shacklebolt," Harry said. "Come in. My solicitor is in the floor room if you need a witness." The older Auror started to say something. Shacklebolt put a hand up without looking at him. "Thank you," he said to Harry. They sat in the front parlor, which Pip had clearly been maintaining at a level of readiness that suggested she'd anticipated official visitors. Tea appeared. The older Auror looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. Shacklebolt sat with his elbows on his knees and looked at Harry with that same quality of complicated attention. "The minister wants to know," Shacklebolt said, "that you're safe and that you have appropriate adult supervision and support." "Both of which the Prophet article already addressed," Harry said. "The minister's office didn't get the information from the Prophet," Shacklebolt said carefully. "They prefer to receive it officially. Through a welfare check." "Yes." Harry looked at him for a moment. "Auror Shacklebolt, can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "Did the minister ask you to come here, or did someone suggest to the minister that he should send someone here, and he agreed?" Shacklebolt was very still for exactly 2 seconds. "Those are different questions," he said. "I know," Harry said. "That's why I'm asking." The older Auror was now looking between them with the expression of a man who had stepped into something he hadn't been briefed on. Shacklebolt picked up his tea and looked at it and then set it down without drinking. "I can confirm your welfare is being noted," he said. "For the official record." "Noted as good," Harry said. "I have a home, legal representation, financial independence, and a provisional educational plan reviewed by 2 Hogwarts governors. I'm also 7, which means I'm legally entitled to no ministry oversight unless I'm in demonstrated danger." He met Shacklebolt's eyes. "Which I'm not, now that my previous living situation has been ended." He paused. "You can tell whoever sent you that I said that." Something shifted in Shacklebolt's expression, it moved through professional neutrality into something that, if it had been allowed to be what it was, would have been close to respect. "I'll make note of it," he said. They stood to leave. At the door, the older Auror went through first, and Shacklebolt paused. "Off the record," Harry said quietly, because he'd been reading people all his life from a position of someone who had to, "Are you actually concerned? Or are you checking?" Shacklebolt looked at him for a long moment. "I read your father's file in the Auror archives 2 years ago," he said, keeping his voice low. "Routine research. It's detailed." He paused. "You have his way of looking at things." Harry didn't say anything. "You're well," Shacklebolt said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement that meant something more than the words. "Good." He left. Harry watched him go, and filed Kingsley Shacklebolt in a category he was just beginning to build, for people who were in places that were wrong for them but hadn't yet found the moment to move. Sirius Black arrived at Potter Manor at 8:15 that evening. He didn't arrive in any condition Harry had been prepared for, despite Amelia Bones's briefing. The briefing had included words like malnourished, disoriented, significant dementor exposure, magically and physically depleted, and Harry had processed those words correctly and intellectually. But processing words was different from standing in the front hallway of his family's home and watching a door open. Sirius was 32 years old and looked 20 years older than that. He was tall, or had the frame of someone who would have been tall before being compressed by things that compress people, and his eyes were still light gray. That was the most alive thing about him, the eyes, which moved and noticed and were tracking with an alertness that the rest of him was struggling to match. He was wearing ministry-issue clothes that didn't fit, and his hair was long and matted, and he was holding himself with the practiced careful stillness of someone whose body had learned that unexpected movement caused problems. Amelia Bones was with him, and a ministry healer who had done emergency work at the transfer point, and Serena Bones, who had come from her office directly, and all three of them were paying careful attention to Sirius in the way of people ensuring he didn't startle. Sirius looked at the hallway of Potter Manor. He looked at the photographs on the walls, James, Lily, the ones Pip had kept dusted and lit, and something happened in his face that Harry couldn't look directly at for a moment, the way you can't look directly at the sun even when you know what it is. Then Sirius looked down. He looked at Harry. Looked at his eyes, specifically, the way James's letter had told Harry Sirius would. And Harry watched the recognition happen, watched it move through the gray eyes like weather, the wreckage of 7 years of grief and cold and wrongness all surfacing at once, and then something that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with something older. Lily's eyes, Sirius said. His voice was wrecked, rough as old stone. James's everything else. He stopped. You look exactly like the pictures. You're taller than I expected, Harry said. And thinner. Sirius made a sound. It might have been a laugh. It didn't quite have the shape of one yet, but it was trying. That tracks, he said. He looked around the hallway again. I haven't been here since. He stopped. I know, Harry said. Pip has been keeping it. As if summoned, Pip appeared at the kitchen doorway with the expression of someone running several competing emotional processes simultaneously and winning all of them. She looked at Sirius Black and her enormous eyes went very bright. Master Sirius, she said. You need feeding. Sirius looked at her for a moment, and Harry watched something in his shoulders drop, not collapse, but release, the specific letting go of someone who has encountered the unconditional domesticity of a house elf who knew them when they were young and hasn't changed their opinion since. Yeah, Sirius said, slightly hoarsely. Yeah, I probably do. Pip fed him for what appeared to be the better part of an hour, during which the healer checked him twice more, and Amelia Bones sat at the kitchen table and reviewed paperwork while carefully not staring, and Serena Bones went through the transfer documentation with the focused care of someone building a foundation. Harry sat across from Sirius and watched him eat and didn't fill the silence with things it didn't need. Sirius ate the way people eat when their body has been making decisions about survival without consulting them for a long time, automatic and focused and slightly desperate underneath the control. He got through about half of what Pip put in front of him before stopping because more was impossible, and then he sat with his hands wrapped around a mug of tea and looked at Harry across the table with the gray eyes that were sharp even when the rest of him was not. They told me, Sirius said, what you did. The vault. The filings. He paused. You're 7. People keep saying that, Harry said. It's remarkable. My parents left good documentation, Harry said. And Ragnarok has been building a legal case for years. I just authorized it. Sirius was quiet for a moment. James's letter was in the vault. Yes. He said, he told me, before, that he'd written things down. In case. He turned the mug in his hands. I didn't think they'd actually, that I'd ever, he stopped again. He was doing this, stopping in the middle of sentences, and Harry understood it wasn't confusion, it was the opposite, it was someone with too much trying to find the specific thread worth pulling. He said you didn't betray them, Harry said. His letter. He said he knew. Sirius closed his eyes. Just briefly. When he opened them, the gray was very bright. Peter Pettigrew, he said. Peter was the secret keeper. It was, we switched. Last minute. James's idea, to throw anyone off if they suspected me. His jaw tightened. Peter ran straight to Voldemort. I found him. He detonated the street himself, killed 12 muggles, cut off his own finger to fake his death, and transformed. He looked at his hands. He's an animagus. An unregistered rat. He's been hiding as a rat for 7 years. We'll need that in a formal statement, Harry said. Serena. From the other side of the table, Serena Bones, who had been listening with her quill not entirely at rest, made an affirmative sound and wrote something down. Just like that? Sirius said. He's not dead, Harry said. He's hiding. If he's hiding, he can be found. He looked at Sirius steadily. You've been in Azkaban for 7 years for something you didn't do, and the person who actually did it has been hiding as a rat somewhere in Britain. We have every legal tool available to us, a sitting head of magical law enforcement whose sister is your solicitor's closest colleague, and documentary evidence that the processing of your case was deliberately expedited to prevent a trial. He paused. I think we can find one rat. Sirius looked at him for a long time. James called you a hypothetical, he said finally. Before you were born. Said if he had a son he stopped. He said something particular. Something I used to argue about with him. What? He said the best thing he could imagine was a kid who was better than either of us. Sirius's voice was rough, but something in it was rebuilding. More stubborn than me, smarter than him, and with Lily's ability to look at something and see it clearly without getting distracted by how it's supposed to look. He shook his head. He'd be absolutely insufferable about being right. He was right, Harry said. Sirius laughed. This time it had the proper shape. Later, when Sirius was asleep in the guest room that Pip had prepared with a speed that suggested she'd had it ready for some time, Harry went back to the study and sat with the Emery's book. Not to read, this time. Just to think. He thought about Hermione Granger in the bookshop, talking about foundational magic with the certainty of someone who had read 3 weeks of wizarding theory and was already extrapolating correctly. He thought about Kingsley Shacklebolt at the door, saying you look at things like your father in a voice that was doing something complicated underneath the official tone. He thought about Narcissa Malfoy, sitting very straight, offering information as currency because it was the only safe currency she had. He thought about Dumbledore. He hadn't heard from Dumbledore directly. Not a letter, not a fluke call, nothing. The absence was louder than any communication would have been. A man of Dumbledore's position and alleged relationship to Harry's welfare had gone completely silent in the 36 hours since the Prophet article, and Harry was certain that silence was not inaction. It was calculation. The book opened itself. He didn't touch it. The page it fell to read, when someone very intelligent goes quiet, they are not doing nothing. They are selecting their ground. I know, Harry said, to the book, to the firelit room, to whoever was still paying attention across the distance that death made. I'm selecting mine too. He thought about what Dumbledore had. Not money, the legal proceedings were already working on that. Not legal standing, the emancipation application was moving faster than anyone had expected. Not even public opinion, because the Prophet had reframed that overnight. What Dumbledore had was something harder to file a legal complaint about. He had decades, and relationships, and the specific unassailable position of the man who had always been the one to tell the story about the war, about Voldemort, about Harry. He was the narrator. And there was exactly one thing you could do about a narrator who had decided you were a character in their story rather than the author of your own. You wrote a better one. The second Prophet article ran 4 days after the first. This one wasn't Skeeter, it was a reporter named Barnabas Cuff, the editor himself, which told Harry that the story had escalated past the features desk into something the paper was treating as institutional. The headline was, Wisingamot acknowledges Potter fraud case. Emancipation hearing set. The article detailed the Wisingamot's official acknowledgement of the fraud filing, the scheduling of an emancipation hearing for the following week, and a brief but significant quote from Griselda Marchbanks, who had apparently decided that if she was going to say something, she was going to say it publicly. The quote read, the documentation in this case represents the most significant breach of wizarding guardianship law in modern history. The Hogwarts Board of Governors takes the matter with the gravity it deserves. Dumbledore's office had issued a statement. Harry read it 3 times with the care it required. The statement said that Dumbledore had acted, at all times, in the best interests of Harry Potter, that the decisions made in 1981 were made in a time of extraordinary crisis with the welfare of both Harry and the wizarding world in mind, that certain documents had been misinterpreted or taken out of context, and that Dumbledore looked forward to clarifying the full picture through appropriate legal channels. It was, Harry thought, an extraordinarily careful statement. Not a denial, a reframing. Best interests. Extraordinary crisis. Misinterpreted. The entire architecture of the statement was designed to pre-establish a narrative before the formal hearing. He wrote a note to Serena, read his statement carefully. Every word is a preview of his defense. He's going to argue necessity and context. Make sure we're prepared for that specifically. She wrote back within an hour, already noted. We're prepared. Luna Lovegood found him in Diagon Alley the following Thursday, which was the day he told Hermione he'd be back at Flourish and Blotts. He hadn't seen her coming, she simply appeared at his elbow between one moment and the next, which he was beginning to think was either a talent or a property of the universe where she was concerned. She was a year younger than him, he'd learn, with blonde hair that moved as if it had its own agenda and eyes the pale silver gray of early morning, and she was carrying what appeared to be an upside-down copy of a publication called The Quibbler. "Hello," she said. "You're Harry Potter-Black-Merlin." "Yes," Harry said. He was not startled. He'd stopped being startled easily sometime around the 3rd day at Potter Manor. "I'm Luna Lovegood." She looked at him with the direct, tranquil assessment of someone who saw the world clearly and was simply checking whether the world was doing the same. "Your aura is very unusual. It's mostly gold with a deep blue underneath, which is rare. It usually means someone is exactly what they think they are. Is that good?" "It's uncommon," Luna said, which he understood was her version of yes. She looked at the shop window. "Are you meeting someone?" "A girl named Hermione Granger. She's been helping me with research." "Oh," Luna said, as though this confirmed something she'd already expected. "She has a very bright aura. Very organized. Sometimes too organized, but it smooths out when she relaxes." Harry looked at her. "Can you actually see auras?" "I can see something," Luna said thoughtfully. "I'm not sure what to call it exactly. Things have qualities. People have qualities. Yours is very steady." She paused. "You're worried about someone. Not for yourself. For them." "Serious," Harry said, without deciding to. There was something about Luna Lovegood that made answers come up before you deliberated on whether to give them. "The one you got out of prison," she said. It wasn't a question. "He's recovering," Harry said. "It's not fast." "Recovery isn't supposed to be fast," Luna said, in the serene tone of someone who had thought about this. "It's supposed to be real. Fast and real are different things." She turned the upside-down quibbler right side up, looked at it, then turned it back. "My mum died when I was 5. Dad said I recovered fast." He was measuring the wrong thing. Harry looked at her for a moment. "I'm sorry about your mother." "Thank you," Luna said. "She was brilliant and strange and she would have liked you very much." She said it the way people state facts that are both painful and completely settled. "She would have had opinions about your situation. She always had opinions about institutional dishonesty. That's what the Quibbler is for." "Your father runs the Quibbler?" "Yes. He's already asked me to ask you if you'd be willing to write something. Not an interview. An actual article. You could write whatever you wanted." She looked at him with those pale eyes. "Dad says the prophet tells people what to think. The Quibbler asks what they already know." Harry thought about that. He thought about Dumbledore being the narrator, and about the need for a better story. "I'd be interested," he said. Hermione arrived at that moment, slightly out of breath, with 4 books already in her bag and the expression of someone who had been doing research since early morning. She looked at Luna, who looked back at her with uncomplicated interest. "Hermione Granger," Harry said. Luna Lovegood. Hermione, who had excellent social instincts when she slowed down long enough to use them, offered her hand. Luna shook it with both of hers. "Your aura smooths at the edges when you're with people you're comfortable with," Luna told Hermione. Hermione blinked. Thank you." "It's a compliment," Harry confirmed. "Oh," Hermione said. "Then thank you." She looked between them with the expression of someone recalibrating, then apparently decided that recalibration was acceptable and moved on. "I found the Emery's legal precedent records you asked about. The 10th century emancipation case is fully documented, and there's a stronger precedent from 847 AD that your solicitor may not have." She pulled a sheaf of handwritten notes from her bag. Luna looked at the notes with interest. "Did you write those today?" "This morning," Hermione said. "You're very efficient," Luna said, admiringly. Something in Hermione's expression unlocked entirely. "I just think it's important to be prepared," she said. "It is," Harry agreed, taking the notes and looking at them. Hermione's handwriting was extraordinary, not just neat but organized, cross-referenced, with marginal notes and source citations. He looked up at her. "These are excellent." She went slightly pink, and then didn't, because she was who she was. The 847 case is particularly relevant because it involves a case where the fraudulent guardian was an institutional figure rather than a family member. The magical emancipation was granted on the basis of documented systemic harm rather than individual incident. "That's our case," Harry said immediately. "That's exactly your case," Hermione confirmed. Luna looked between the two of them with the serene pleasure of someone watching 2 complicated things fit together. "You're going to win," she said, in the same tone she'd used to describe everything else. "The auras are very clear about it." "The legal documentation helps too," Harry said. "Yes," Luna agreed. "But the auras first." The ministry operative arrived at 4:30. Not auras this time. A single person, a wizard in plain robes, no badge, no official identification, which was itself information. He came to the manor gate with the particular energy of someone executing a task they'd been told was simple and was discovering in real time that it wasn't. Harry was at his desk in the study when Pip appeared in the doorway with a look that communicated several things simultaneously. Someone was at the gate, she did not like them, and she was fully prepared to be very specific about what the wards allowed. "Who is it?" Harry asked. "Says his name is Dawlish," Pip said. "Ministry official. Says he has a temporary guardianship order." She said the words with the precise diction of someone quoting something very absurd. Harry stood up. "Tell him I'll be there in a moment." He went to the front hall and opened the door himself, and the man at the gate, middle-aged, square-jawed, holding a document with a ministry seal, looked at him with the expression of someone who had genuinely expected this to be straightforward. "Mr. Potter," Dawlish said. "I have an order signed by the Office of Wizarding Family Affairs directing that you be placed in temporary ministry-supervised custody pending the outcome of the ongoing." "Who signed it?" Harry asked. A pause. "The order is signed by Undersecretary." "What's the Undersecretary's full name and appointment date?" Another pause. "Dolores Jane Umbridge," Dawlish said, slightly less confidently. "And does Undersecretary Umbridge have authority over inheritance-verified, goblin-protected estates?" Harry asked. He kept his voice completely even. "Because according to the Gringotts Charter of 1947, Section 12, a goblin-verified emancipated heir in residence on a legacy estate is not subject to ministry welfare orders without a counter-signature from the department head, which would be Amelia Bones." He looked at the document through the gate bars. "Is Amelia Bones's signature on that?" Dawlish looked at the document. His expression shifted through several stages. The counter-signature is from an acting deputy director. That's not the same thing, Harry said. And I think you know that. He looked at Dawlish steadily. Are you here because you believe this order is legal, or because you were told to come here and now you're not sure? Dawlish was quiet for a moment. He was a career ministry man. Harry could see it in the way he held himself, the automatic deference to paperwork, the slight discomfort of someone whose tools of professional certainty had just been turned. He looked at the document again and then at Harry. I'll need to verify the counter-signature requirements, he said. Yes, Harry agreed. You will. I suggest calling Amelia Bones directly. He paused. You can use my flu. If you'd like. Dawlish looked at him for a long moment. Something in his professional composure was doing something quiet and complicated. He straightened slightly. Thank you, he said. But I'll manage. He folded the document. I'll verify the requirements and follow up through appropriate channels. That sounds right, Harry said. Dawlish left. Harry watched him go and noted the angle of his shoulders, not the stiff march of someone committed to their orders, but the slightly loosened walk of someone who had just decided to not do something. He went back inside. Pip, he said. Pip appeared. Can you ask Dob to reinforce the outer ward perimeter? The east side specifically, it was the slight gap I found the other night. Already done, Master Harry, Pip said, with the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated the request. Dob reinforced at 6 this morning. Harry looked at her. You knew someone was coming. Pip folded her hands. Pip has been keeping this house for 7 years, she said. Pip knows when the wards are being looked at from outside. Who? Harry asked. Not the ministry man, Pip said. Earlier. Yesterday evening. A very careful person, walking the perimeter. Not attempting to enter. Just looking. She met his eyes. Very old magic in their signature. Controlled. Patient. Dumbledore, Harry thought. Not moving yet. Still selecting his ground. Thank you, Pip, he said. He went back to the study. He picked up the Emery's book and it opened immediately to a page he hadn't seen before, the letters clear and unhurried. He's coming, the page read. Not violently. He'll try words first. He always tries words first. He is extremely good with words. So are you. The difference is that his words are designed to make you feel like you owe him something. When he talks about sacrifice and the greater good, he means it, he always means it, but he means it in the way of someone who has decided that the meaning justifies the math. It doesn't. When he comes, be specific. Be honest. Don't be moved by the performance of wisdom. Wisdom that serves itself is just cleverness in a longer coat. Harry closed the book. Outside the study window, the garden of Potter Manor was coming back to life the way things do when someone is finally in residence to tend them, not overnight, not dramatically, but daily, incrementally, the way real things grow. Tomorrow was the emancipation hearing. Somewhere in Hogwarts, in an office full of carefully arranged objects and portraits of sleeping headmasters, Albus Dumbledore was, Harry was quite sure, doing the same thing Harry was doing. Preparing. Chapter 4, Old Magic, Old Enemies. The Wizengamot chamber smelled like old stone and older decisions. Harry had never been inside it before, but he'd read about it, the tiered seating carved from the same black stone as the ministry's lower levels, the central floor where petitioners stood, the high bench where the senior members sat with the weight of accumulated institutional authority pressing down from every angle. It was designed, he understood, to make the person standing in the center feel small. The architecture was doing its job. He walked in and looked at it and decided that the architecture was going to have to find someone else to work on. Serena Bones was at his left, a folder under each arm and 2 more in her bag, and the expression of someone who had been waiting for this particular morning with the patience of a very good chess player. Ragnarok was at his right, which was unprecedented enough that Harry had noticed 3 Wizengamot members actually lean forward when they came in together. Goblins did not attend Wizengamot proceedings. They attended when invited, in formal consultation. Ragnarok had received an invitation at Harry's specific request, because he wanted the bank's documentation introduced by the person who maintained it, and because Ragnarok's presence in this chamber would communicate, to anyone paying attention, that Gringotts was treating this as a matter of institutional significance. Sirius was in the gallery above. He'd asked to come and Harry had said yes without hesitation, because Sirius had a right to watch the machinery that had wronged him begin to be corrected. He was not fully recovered. 10 days out of Azkaban was not enough time for 7 years of damage, but he was considerably more present than he'd been on arrival, the grey eyes sharp, and he had come in wearing robes that Pip had apparently located in a trunk in the attic, cleaned and pressed, and which fit him well enough that Harry could see the shape of the person his parents had described in their letters. Hermione and Luna were in the gallery too. Luna had brought her upside-down quibbler. Hermione had brought notes. The Wizengamot was presiding in a reduced session. This was an emancipation hearing, not a full trial, and the Committee of 11 was chaired by a senior undersecretary named Tiberius Ogden, who had the bearing of someone sufficiently senior to not be easily intimidated but sufficiently political to be aware of the morning's optics. He called the session to order with a tap of his wand and looked at the center of the chamber with the professional neutrality of someone who had read everything and formed no stated opinions. Harry James Potter-Black-Merlin, Ogden said. Age 7. The petitioner seeks emancipated status under the provisions of the Wizarding Emancipation Act and the Emancipatio Magica clause contained in the verified will of the late Lily Evans Potter. He looked up. Representation. Serena Bones, solicitor, on behalf of the petitioner. Serena stepped forward. We are also submitting documentation from Gringotts Wizarding Bank, represented today by Senior Director Ragnarok, which is foundational to the petition. A slight stir went through the chamber. Ogden looked at Ragnarok with the measured expression of a man deciding how to regard something unprecedented. Director Ragnarok. Welcome. The bank thanks the committee for its accommodation, Ragnarok said, with a formality so precise it was almost sharp. Ogden made a note. The petitioner may speak. Harry stepped forward to the center of the chamber. He stood in the designated position, the stone floor smooth under his feet, and he looked up at the 11 members of the committee and the gallery above and the portraits on the walls of former chief warlocks, one of whom, he noticed, had a distinctive beard and half-moon glasses and was watching from his painted frame with an attention so contained it was its own kind of statement. Harry looked at the painted Dumbledore for exactly 1 second, then turned to the committee. I'm going to be brief, he said, because he had learned from the Emery's book and from his mother's letters that brevity in legal settings was a form of confidence, and confidence in legal settings was more effective than volume. The petition for emancipated status rests on 3 things. The first is documented evidence of fraudulent guardianship, which has already been submitted to this committee and to the Office of Estate Affairs. The second is the Emancipatio Magica clause in my mother's will, which is legally unambiguous and supported by precedent dating back to 847 AD. The third is the Emery's bloodline inheritance, verified by Gringotts yesterday morning, which carries a standing hereditary provision for early emancipation that has never been revoked. He paused. None of these things require argument. They require acknowledgement. The third provision, a committee member on the left said, a woman named Augusta Longbottom, Harry knew her from Serena's briefing, formidable and fair, has not been invoked in over 1,000 years. The last heir of the Emery's line was 700 years ago, Harry said. The provision doesn't expire. It waits. He met Augusta Longbottom's eyes. I'm here. She looked at him with the expression of someone reassessing the weight of what they're looking at. She made a note. The hearing took 2 hours. Serena presented the documentation with the clean efficiency of someone who had organized it for exactly this occasion, the original will, Gringotts' authenticated copy, the withdrawal ledgers, the guardianship forgery analysis, the comparative document assessment showing the differences between Lily Potter's will and the version submitted to the ministry. She introduced the 847 AD precedent that Hermione had found, which produced a brief murmur from the committee because none of them had apparently known about it. Ragnarok presented the bank's formal position, which was, in the clinical language of Goblin institutional statements, devastating. He confirmed the vault activation. He confirmed the withdrawal records. He confirmed the authentication analysis on both will documents. When Augusta Longbottom asked him directly whether Gringotts considered the fraudulent withdrawals to have been made with knowledge of their illegality, Ragnarok said, the structuring of the withdrawals, monthly, consistent amounts, over 7 years, through a channel that bypassed the standard heir notification protocols, is not consistent with oversight or error. It is consistent with deliberate circumvention. The committee voted at noon. 8-3 in favor. Harry was emancipated. The 3 dissenting votes were, Serena confirmed quietly as they left, from members with documented affiliations to the minister's office. She would be noting that in the fraud case file. In the hallway outside the chamber, Sirius was waiting. He was standing the way someone stands when they've been holding something for a while and are not quite ready to put it down, very still, hands in the pockets of his clean robes, the gray eyes tracking the chamber doors as Harry came through them. When he saw Harry's face he made a sound that was too small to be called anything in particular and then crossed the hallway in 3 steps and put a hand on Harry's shoulder, just briefly, just the weight of it. 8-3, Harry said. I heard, Sirius said. His voice was rough again, but differently than it had been, not the rough of exhaustion but the rough of something that had been compressed being allowed to expand. Serena's brilliant. She is, Harry agreed. We should do something about those 3 votes, though. Sirius looked at him and then laughed, the real laugh, the one with its full shape. Right, he said. 7 years old and already building a political opposition file. I have excellent role models, Harry said, which made Sirius laugh again, and this time it ran deeper, and Harry felt the warmth of it in a way that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the specific comfort of having a person who had loved your parents standing next to you laughing. Hermione appeared from the gallery stairs with Luna just behind her. Hermione's expression was the organized satisfaction of someone whose research had contributed to a concrete outcome. The 847 precedent, she said, without preamble. Did they use it? Longbottom cited it directly, Harry said. It was the decisive argument for at least 2 of the middle votes. Hermione's expression performed a small, precise celebration. Luna put a hand on her arm in a gentle, grounding way, and Hermione took a breath and looked at Harry and said, with the warmth she kept under her efficiency like a fire under good stone, I'm glad. So am I, Harry said. Thank you. I'll keep researching, she said, as if she'd do it regardless, which was true. Potter Manor in the afternoon was different from Potter Manor in the mornings. The light came through the west-facing study windows at an angle that turned the wood of the shelves warm and deep, and everything was quieter, and it was in this quality of quiet that things settled rather than pressed. Harry was in the training room when the magic changed. He'd been working on something specific. The Emery's book had, in the past week, moved him into a section it titled The Architecture of Intent, which was about understanding the structural grammar of magic rather than its vocabulary, about what happened at the level below spells when intention met the world. He'd been practicing something like listening, standing in the center of the room and paying attention to the room's magical structure the way you'd pay attention to a sound at the edge of hearing, not forcing it, just making space for it. What he noticed was an anomaly. Not in the room. Not in the house. Outside the house. The manor's wards went out a considerable distance, farther than the garden wall, farther than the property line, layers of old protective magic that Pip and Dob had maintained and that had been strengthened by Harry's occupancy in the way that protections strengthen when the person they're protecting is actually in residence. He could feel them the way he could feel his own heartbeat, ambient, familiar, background. Except that one layer wasn't ambient anymore. Something was pressing against the outer boundary. Not violently. Not trying to penetrate. Feeling, precisely and patiently, for the places where layers overlapped, where the seams of different magical signatures met, where the transition between one ward type and another created, not a gap exactly, but a texture difference. Like someone running a finger along a wall looking for a join. He recognized the magical signature. Not because he'd felt it directly before, but because it had a quality he'd read about. It had the specific warmth of accumulated magical authority, the sense of something that had been practiced and developed for decades, and underneath that warmth, buried under layer after layer of legitimate power and genuine good intention, the particular cold current of a person who had made a habit of deciding that they knew better. Harry stood very still and let the sensation complete itself, mapping the full scope of what was happening outside the wall. Dumbledore was not trying to enter. He was studying the wards. Learning them. The way a very intelligent person learns a situation before deciding how to approach it. Harry went to the study and sent a note to Serena, "He's here. Outside the boundary. Not entering. I'll let you know if that changes." Then he went to the front door and opened it and walked out to the garden wall. Albus Dumbledore was standing on the lane outside the manor, and he looked, Harry had to acknowledge, exactly as he looked in the portraits and the newspaper photographs and the way he'd existed in Harry's imagination since reading the prophet's first story about Voldemort's defeat. He was tall, silver-haired, robed in something deep purple with small silver stars, and he had the bearing of a man who was used to being the most significant presence in any room and had carried that quality into the outdoors where rooms didn't technically apply. He was looking at the manor with the expression of someone seeing something for the first time that they had thought they understood. He became aware of Harry at the gate a moment after Harry stopped there, and his expression shifted, a very controlled shift, everything moving in the direction of warmth and gentle sorrow and the careful compassion of someone who has been thinking about a difficult conversation for a long time. Harry watched him prepare the performance, and felt nothing about it except clarity. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was exactly what it should be, warm, deep, careful. "I am glad to see you." "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. He kept the gate between them without making a point of it. "I expected you earlier." A slight pause. "I wanted to give you time to settle," Dumbledore said. "This has been an enormous amount of change in a very short period." "It has," Harry agreed. Some of the changes were overdue. Dumbledore looked at him with the eyes that Harry had heard described as something between grandfather and headmaster, blue and bright and carrying the specific intelligence of someone who had been doing this, managing people and situations, for 60 years. He smiled, very slightly. "May I come in?" "No," Harry said. The smile stayed where it was. Not falling, held, with considerable skill, in place. "Harry, I'll talk to you here," Harry said. "Or through solicitors. Those are the options right now." Dumbledore studied him for a moment with something moving behind the blue eyes, not anger, something more complicated than anger. Adjustment. Recalibration. The specific recalibration of someone who had prepared for a version of this conversation that assumed a different kind of 7-year-old. "Very well," he said, and he leaned slightly against the lane wall with the ease of someone who had decided to treat the outdoors as his parlor. "Then let me say what I came to say." "Please," Harry said. "What I did, the decisions I made in the days after your parents' deaths, I made because I believed they were necessary. Not for myself. For you. For everyone who survived the war." He paused with the timing of someone who knew how timing worked. "I placed you with your aunt because the protective magic lily cast required a blood connection to be anchored. The will as submitted reflected the operational reality of that magic, even if it differed from what she had written before the war's end. My mother's will was written 8 days before she died," Harry said. "Not before the war's end. 8 days before. She was alive and coherent and fully aware of the magical architecture she had built. She named Sirius Black as guardian specifically and in writing. Lily had spoken to me, she didn't change her will," Harry said. "If she'd changed her mind she would have changed her will. She was precise. You knew she was precise. That's why you didn't try to forge a new document, you altered the existing one, because a new document would have been harder to authenticate." He watched Dumbledore's face very carefully. The two documents are dated 8 days apart. Hers is the earlier one. Yours is the later one. You didn't change her mind. You changed her document. The outdoor light was even and clear. There was nowhere in it for expression to hide, which was, Harry thought, possibly why Dumbledore had wanted to be inside. The money, Harry said, when Dumbledore didn't speak. The monthly withdrawals. 10 years of them. He watched. What were they for? The Order of the Phoenix required funding during the war, Dumbledore said. And after, during the years of rebuilding. Resources that the Ministry would not provide, through channels that could not be official. The money was used in service of what, exactly? Harry asked. Of keeping the peace. Of monitoring threats. Of ensuring that what your parents died for wasn't lost. His voice was absolutely even. The vaults would have provided no benefit to you sitting in Gringotts for a decade. The resources were put to meaningful use. My resources, Harry said. My parents' resources. Used without their knowledge or consent, by forging their legal documents, while I was sleeping in a cupboard under some stairs. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression that was hard to name. Not guilt, Harry thought. Closer to the particular discomfort of someone who has been confronted with an arithmetic they'd chosen not to do. He looked at Harry with the blue eyes and said, with absolute sincerity, I am sorry for the conditions of your childhood. I am genuinely sorry. That was not the outcome I intended. What outcome did you intend? Harry asked. Precisely managed obscurity, Dumbledore said, and he said it with the directness of someone deciding that honesty was now the better strategy. I needed you to be raised without knowledge of your significance. Not because I wished you harm. Because a child who knows from infancy that they are destined for something extraordinary, who grows up with unlimited resources, with access to their full inheritance, with the magical training and the family name and the weight of expectation, becomes something unpredictable. Something that may not make the choice that needs to be made when the moment arrives. He looked at Harry steadily. There is a prophecy, Harry. About you. About what you must eventually face. I have been managing the conditions of that necessity. Harry looked at him. You've been managing me, Harry said. Since I was a year old. You decided what I should know, where I should live, what I should have and not have. You decided it was more important that I grow up manageable than that I grow up protected. He kept his voice completely level. And you're telling me this now because you think explaining your reasoning will make me understand. That if I see the full scope of your logic, I'll acknowledge that it was logical. It was, Dumbledore said quietly. I believe it still is. I know you do, Harry said. That's the part I've been thinking about. He held Dumbledore's gaze and said, without anger, without performance, just with the specific clarity that the Emery's book had been asking of him since the first page, there's a prophecy. About me. You've known about it for how long? Since before your birth, Dumbledore said. And in that time, you decided that the best thing for the subject of a prophecy was to make sure they were kept ignorant, isolated, underfed, and legally stripped of every resource their family left them. Because a managed child makes the right choice at the critical moment. Harry tilted his head very slightly. What would the wrong choice look like? What were you afraid I'd do if I grew up with my actual inheritance? The lane was very quiet. Somewhere in the manor garden, something was moving in the old ivy on the wall, a bird or the wind. Dumbledore looked at him with the blue eyes and said nothing for a long moment. It was the first time, Harry thought, that the silence was his rather than a tool. I feared, Dumbledore said finally, that you would become someone who could not be guided. Guided toward what? Harry asked. Another silence. Then, toward the choice that ends this. Harry looked at him and then said something he'd been carrying since he'd read the letter from the Emery's vault, the page that had explained the nature of the line's magic, the page that had talked about prophecy in the context of foundational magic. Prophecies are descriptions of possibility. They're not instructions. Something that describes what might happen isn't the same as something that dictates what must. Dumbledore blinked. A small movement, but a real one. The Emery's bloodline, Harry continued, has been negotiating with the fundamental architecture of magic since the 6th century. The vault contains documentation of at least 3 instances where prophecy was not fulfilled because the subject understood it well enough to recognize the conditions that made it feel inevitable and then simply changed the conditions. He watched Dumbledore process that. I am not a pawn on a board. I am not a weapon to be kept in a scabbard until the right moment. I am the heir of 3 of the oldest magical bloodlines in Britain, and I have been legally emancipated, and the fraud case against you is filed and moving, and I am not afraid of you. The last sentence was the most important one. He said it the way you say true things, simply, without decoration. Dumbledore stood very still. The warmth was still on his face, but it was doing something different now. It was the warmth of a man who was genuinely reckoning with something, which was different from the warmth of performance. This was the version Harry found more interesting and more dangerous. You are extraordinary, Dumbledore said, and he meant it, which made it worse somehow. Your parents would be, don't, Harry said, pleasantly. Not as a strategy. Dumbledore closed his mouth. I'll see you at the fraud trial, Harry said. You should have good legal representation. The documentation against you is thorough. He paused. Good afternoon. He walked back up the garden path and into the house. The door closed behind him. He was sitting in the study with the Emery's book open when Sirius appeared in the doorway, looking at him with the particular expression of someone who had been watching from somewhere and had opinions. I saw him from the upstairs window, Sirius said. You talked to him alone? Yes. Harry, he didn't come to threaten, Harry said. He came to explain. There's a prophecy. He's known about it since before I was born. He looked at Sirius. Do you know about it? Sirius was quiet for a moment. James mentioned it once. Near the end. Just, that Dumbledore had told them there was one. That it was why they went into hiding. He came fully into the room and sat in the chair across from the desk. What did he tell you? That it involves me and Voldemort. That he's been managing my upbringing specifically to ensure I make the right choice when the moment comes. Harry kept his voice even. That he was afraid if I grew up with my actual inheritance, I'd become someone he couldn't guide. Sirius's jaw tightened. It was a controlled movement, which told Harry he was managing something considerably stronger than his expression showed. He said that. He was honest about it, once he decided honesty was the better approach. Harry looked at the fire. He's not lying about the prophecy. He's not lying about his reasons. He genuinely believes he was doing what needed to be done. That doesn't make it, no, Harry said. It doesn't. But it means arguing about morality is not the useful fight. The useful fight is legal and structural. Strip away his authority to act unilaterally on the basis of his private strategic calculations, and it doesn't matter whether he believes he was right. He looked at Sirius. The emancipation is the first step. The fraud case is the second. The third is the headmaster question, which Marchbanks is building toward. Every step reduces his ability to make unilateral decisions about my life, and about anyone else's. Sirius looked at him for a long, particular moment. You planned this before you talked to him. I planned the conversation, yes, Harry said. I wanted to hear what he'd say when he decided to be direct. He's more careful when he's being indirect. Direct tells you what he actually thinks. And what does he actually think? That the prophecy is real, that Voldemort isn't finished, and that I'm the only viable solution. That everything he did was in service of keeping that solution intact. Harry closed the Emery's book. He's probably not wrong about Voldemort. But his plan for handling it, a managed, ignorant, traumatized child making a noble sacrifice at the right moment, that plan is over. Sirius sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and then at Harry and then at the fire, and then he said, "Merlin, James would be so, he would be absolutely beside himself." He pressed the heel of his hand to his eye for a moment. "In a good way. He'd be so proud he'd be useless with it." Harry felt the warmth of that in his chest, where the blood call had been quiet since the first day. He let himself feel it without managing it. "Tell me about the prophecy," he said. "What you know?" Sirius leaned forward. "Only what James told me. More actions. Right, the next chapter now." Chapter 5, The Reckoning. The Wisengamot chamber was full. Not the reduced committee of 11 from the Emancipation hearing, the full body, all 50 members, filling the tiered seats in a horseshoe that wrapped the central floor from one end to the other. The gallery above was packed to the last seat, and Harry could see, from the central floor where he stood with Serena, that the press gallery on the upper left had been expanded to accommodate a row of reporters who were all doing the specific stillness of people trying not to visibly vibrate with anticipation. Rita Skeeter was in the front row of the press gallery. She caught Harry's eye and her quill went briefly upright in something like a salute. He nodded once. The 50 members of the Wisengamot in full session made the chamber feel different from the Emancipation hearing, the way a river in flood feels different from the same river in summer, the same structure, entirely different weight. Augusta Longbottom was in her senior seat looking like she'd been carved there. Griselda Marchbanks, not a Wisengamot member but present as an invited witness, sat in the observers' gallery with 2 other Hogwarts governors and the patient expression of someone who had waited for this morning for years. Cornelius Fudge was in the minister's box, a raised section to the right of the main bench, and he looked the way Harry had expected him to look, a man in a situation that had grown considerably larger than his preferred operating environment, his lime green bowler hat absent for the formal occasion, his expression cycling between professional solemnity and the low-grade panic of someone who has been hoping a problem would resolve itself and has run out of time for that. Amelia Bones was at the prosecution table, which was not standard for a department head but which she had apparently decided, with the particular quiet authority of someone who runs their own department, was exactly where she was supposed to be. She'd brought 2 senior aurors and a legal attaché, and her case files were organized with the precision of someone who had been building toward this for years. Sirius was in the gallery, wearing good robes again, sitting between Hermione and Luna. Hermione had a notepad. Luna had the upside-down quibbler. Sirius was watching the chamber with the expression of someone who had imagined sitting in a room where things were being corrected and had not, until now, believed it was actually possible. And at the left side of the central floor, standing at the respondent's position, was Albus Dumbledore. He was wearing dark blue robes, simple for him, without the usual embellishments, and he had clearly made a deliberate choice about presentation, nothing that looked like authority performing itself, nothing that could be characterized as arrogance. He looked like a man who had come to speak honestly and was prepared to be heard. He had 2 solicitors with him, both senior members of the magical bar, whose names Harry had researched and whose reputations were good. He'd chosen well. He looked at Harry when Harry came in, and Harry looked back, and the look between them was brief and entirely devoid of performance on both sides. Just 2 people in a room where the truth was about to be examined. Chief Warlock Ogden called the session to order. Serena opened the prosecution. She was magnificent in the way that people are magnificent when they have spent years preparing for something and know it absolutely. She didn't use notes. She stood in the center of the chamber and spoke with the clean precision of someone whose argument had been organized so thoroughly that it had become instinct, and she laid out the case in the order that Harry had helped her structure, most verifiable facts first, establishing the documentary foundation before anything that required inference. The prosecution will demonstrate, she said, to the full chamber and the gallery above and the reporters at their quills, 3 things. First, that Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore did knowingly alter the legal will of Lily Evans Potter within 8 days of its drafting, materially changing the designated guardian of Harry James Potter from Sirius Orion Black to Petunia Evelyn Desley. Second, that Dumbledore did withdraw, over a period of 7 years, the sum of 10,342,000 galleons from vaults held in trust for Harry James Potter, using fraudulently obtained guardianship authorization. Third, that these actions were not the result of oversight or good faith error, but of deliberate, sustained, and calculated decisions made by a person in a position of extraordinary institutional power, against a child with no ability to contest or even be aware of them. She paused. We will also demonstrate the conditions in which that child lived for 7 years as a direct result of these decisions. Not as an emotional appeal. As evidence of the practical outcome of what the respondent chose to do. The chamber was very quiet. The prosecution calls Ragnarok, Senior Director of Inheritance and Estates, Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Ragnarok testified for 40 minutes, and it was the most effective 40 minutes of the morning. Not because he was dramatic, he was the opposite of dramatic, he was relentlessly precise, every statement sourced, every figure documented, every date cross-referenced. He was the kind of witness who made dramatic opposition impossible because there was nothing to grab hold of, no ambiguity to press against, just fact after verified fact laid down with the composure of someone who had been keeping these records for 7 years and was deeply satisfied to finally be presenting them in a formal setting. He introduced the documents. Both wills, Lily Potter's original, and the version submitted to the ministry. He walked the chamber through them with the patience of someone explaining something simple to people who should have seen it years ago. He pointed to the 8-day gap. He pointed to the differences in the guardian designation, the removal of the backup guardians, the altered blood ward clause. He pointed to the signature analysis, commissioned from a specialist in magical document authentication, which concluded with the probability figure of 99.7% that the two documents had been produced by different hands. He introduced the withdrawal ledgers. Monthly records, 47 entries, 7 years. The authorization signatures. The channel through which the authorization had been fraudulently obtained. When Dumbledore's lead solicitor cross-examined him, the solicitor tried 3 separate lines of questioning: the possibility of administrative error, the question of whether Gringotts procedures might have facilitated an honest mistake, the suggestion that the vault authorization process was sufficiently complex that multiple legitimate parties might have contributed to the result. Ragnarok answered each one with the same measured precision, and each answer closed the line of questioning by being comprehensive enough to leave no follow-up. By the time Ragnarok stepped down, the withdrawal case was not an argument. It was a record. Amelia Bones called the documentary authentication specialist, who explained the signature analysis in technical terms and handled cross-examination with academic confidence. She called a ministry records officer who confirmed the submission date of the altered will and confirmed, under careful questioning, that there was no record of any amendment or codicil from Lily Potter post-dating the original. She called the Hogwarts records registrar, who produced Harry's enrollment documentation, dated from shortly after his birth, listing Sirius Black as emergency contact, which Dumbledore had apparently not thought to alter, and who confirmed that the enrollment had never been updated with guardianship change notifications as required under standard procedure. Then she said, "The prosecution calls Petunia Dursley." A stir went through the chamber. Petunia Dursley arrived in the Gringotts floor with the specific energy of someone who had been legally compelled to appear and was communicating her feelings about this through the rigid angle of her spine. She was tall and angular and wore the expression of someone who had spent 40 years being embarrassed by her family connection to the magical world and was currently discovering that the magical world was embarrassed right back. She sat in the witness chair and looked at nothing in particular with the determination of someone who has decided that minimal cooperation is still technically cooperation. Amelia Bones stood across from her. "Mrs. Dursley," she said. "On the 1st of November, 1981, Albus Dumbledore placed an infant on your doorstep with a letter." "That's correct," Petunia said. "Were you informed, at that time, that this placement was contingent on your providing appropriate care for the child?" A pause. "He said the boy would be safe with family." "Were you informed of the specific provisions of your sister's will?" "No." "Were you informed that there were 7 other designated guardians named in that will before you, all of whom had been bypassed?" "No." "Were you aware that the child in your care had substantial financial assets in trust that were designated for his welfare and education?" Petunia Dursley's jaw tightened. "No," she said, and there was something in the word that wasn't quite just the answer, something that was its own complicated feeling, but Harry, watching from the central floor, didn't pursue what that feeling was. It wasn't relevant to the case. "Can you describe," Amelia Bones said, her voice even and precise, "the accommodations provided to Harry Potter in your home?" The chamber was very still. Petunia looked at her hands. "He had a room," she said. "From birth?" A pause. There was a space under the stairs," she said, with the particular clipped flatness of someone doing the minimum. "When he was small." "A cupboard," Amelia said. "It had a door," Petunia said. Amelia Bones looked at her for a moment with an expression that was professionally blank in the way that things are blank when something is being held very carefully. "Was this space appropriate for a child to sleep in?" "He was quite small," Petunia said. Mrs. Dursley. "Was this space, a cupboard under a staircase, appropriate for a child to sleep in?" "I don't know what you people consider, yes or no, Mrs. Dursley." Petunia was quiet for 2 full seconds. "No," she said. The word fell into the chamber and sat there. In the gallery, Harry heard Sirius make a sound that was not audible from the floor but that he knew the quality of, and he didn't look up because looking up would mean looking at Sirius's face, and that was something to do later, in private. Amelia Bones thanked Petunia Dursley and released her from the witness chair, and Petunia left through the floor with the speed of someone who has said something they cannot take back and doesn't want to watch the consequences. Dumbledore's defense began after the lunch recess. His lead solicitor was good. Harry had expected him to be good, and he was organized, fluent, and he understood that the monetary case was effectively lost, so he concentrated the defense on the framework of intention. He called witnesses who spoke to the crisis conditions of late 1981. He introduced documentation about the threat level in the months before Voldemort's defeat, Ministry threat assessments, Order of the Phoenix communications, incident reports from the war's final weeks. He built a picture, carefully and with genuine craft, of a world that had been on the edge of total collapse and of one man making extraordinary decisions under extraordinary pressure with the tools available to him. It was, Harry thought, a very good defense. Not good enough, but good. Then Dumbledore himself rose to speak. The chamber shifted slightly the way it does when someone with significant presence stands up in it. Dumbledore had been a dominant figure in this room for decades, and the memory of that weight was still in the stones, and 50 Wisengamot members felt it without quite deciding to. He stood without notes. He looked at the chamber with the blue eyes and the measured compassion that was his most natural expression, the one that wasn't performance because it was real, and he spoke in the voice that had been persuading people for 60 years. "I will not," he said, "dispute the record. The documents are what they are. The money moved where it moved. I made decisions that had consequences for a child that I did not fully anticipate, and I am not here to deny that those consequences were real and harmful." He paused. "What I am here to say is that every decision I made with one purpose, the survival of the wizarding world. Not my enrichment. Not my power. The survival of a world that was, in 1981, days from total collapse under the rule of a man whose name most of you still fear to speak." He turned slightly, addressing the full horseshoe of the chamber. "I knew of a prophecy. I had known of it since before Harry Potter was born. A prophecy that named a specific child as the only entity capable of ending Voldemort's power permanently. Not defeating him temporarily. Ending him. And I knew with the certainty of 60 years of watching human nature, that a child raised in full knowledge of that prophecy, in full possession of immense wealth and power and the unqualified adoration of a world that sees them as a savior, becomes something that cannot make the choice the moment requires." His voice was steady and full of conviction and absolutely genuine. "Because the moment requires sacrifice. And humans who have always had everything are very poor at sacrifice." The chamber was completely still. "I was wrong about the conditions," he said. "I acknowledge that completely. The cupboard was wrong. The money should have been used for Harry's care. The will should have been respected in its letter if not its full intent. I will accept whatever legal consequence this chamber determines is appropriate for those failures." He looked at the central floor, at Harry. What I will not accept is the characterization that I acted for my own benefit. I acted for everyone in this room. For everyone in this world. For the child himself, who could not yet understand why the shape of his childhood was what it was. He stopped. The chamber was so quiet that Harry could hear the scratch of Rita Skeeter's quill in the press gallery. Ogden looked at the chamber. The prosecution may respond. Serena turned to Harry. She had told him, in their preparation, that he could speak or not speak, that the legal case didn't require his personal testimony, that the documents were sufficient. She had also told him that if he wanted to speak, the floor was his, and that whatever he said, she trusted him to say it well. Harry stepped forward. He stood in the center of the chamber and looked up at 50 members of the Wizardgamot and the gallery full of people and the press box and the observer gallery and the minister's box where Fudge was sitting with his hands folded and his expression the physical manifestation of hoping to be overlooked. He didn't look at any of them specifically. He looked at the room. I want to respond to one thing, Harry said. Not the legal argument. Serena has handled the legal argument and the documents speak for themselves. I want to respond to what Professor Dumbledore just said about sacrifice. His voice was clear and even in the chamber's acoustics, which carried everything. He said that people who have always had everything are poor at sacrifice. That the shape of my childhood, the cupboard, the missing money, the 7 years without my parents' letters or my family's history or the people my mother actually chose to raise me, was designed to make me capable of the choice that needs to be made. He paused. I want to talk about what that choice is supposed to be, because I think it's important that everyone in this room understands what Professor Dumbledore's plan actually involves. He looked at Dumbledore now. Directly. He believes that defeating Voldemort permanently requires me to willingly die. That the protection my mother created, the love ward, the sacrificial magic, can only be resolved one way. That I have to walk toward Voldemort and let him kill me, at the right moment, in the right way, and that the manner of my death will finish what my mother started. He held Dumbledore's gaze. He has believed this since before I could walk. He chose my guardians, my living conditions, and the shape of my entire childhood around this single strategic calculation. The goal was not a thriving, capable person who could make their own choices about their own fate. The goal was a person who had been made humble enough, ordinary enough, small enough, to accept a plan that someone else made for their death. The chamber was entirely silent. He told me this, partly, when he came to the manor, Harry continued. He was honest about it, which I respect. What I want to address is the assumption underneath it, the assumption that the only resolution is the one he has planned. He reached into his robe and placed the Emery's book on the evidence table beside him. He didn't open it. He just put it there. The Emery's bloodline has studied the mechanism of this kind of soul magic for 1500 years. The specific type of soul fracturing that Voldemort used to make himself harder to kill, and the specific way my mother's protection connected one of those fragments to me, it's documented. It's studied. And it has a solution that doesn't require my death. He looked at the chamber. It requires understanding. It requires skill. It requires, specifically, someone who can negotiate with magic at the foundational level rather than performing it at the surface. Which is what the Emery's inheritance is for. He paused. I am 7 years old and I have had 3 weeks of access to my actual inheritance, and I have already found 2 precedents in 1500 years of documentation for resolving this kind of soul anchor non-lethally. Professor Dumbledore has been planning my death for 7 years on the assumption that the only solution was the one he knew about. He let that sit. He is an extraordinarily intelligent man, Harry said. He has genuine courage, genuine love for this world, and genuine belief that what he did was right. None of that makes it right. What it makes it is the specific tragedy of someone who was so certain of their own judgment that they stopped checking it against other possibilities. He looked at the chamber again, all 50 members and the gallery above. He stole from me. He manipulated the legal documents my mother wrote. He kept Sirius Black in Azkaban for 7 years without a trial, not by accident, but by countersigning the authorization that removed his right to one. He placed me in conditions that he knew, by any reasonable standard, were inadequate. And he did all of this because he had decided, alone, that he knew better. He stopped. Then he said the last thing, and he said it quietly, which made it carry further than shouting. The question for this chamber is not whether he meant well. The question is whether meaning well is sufficient authorization for any of it. Whether the belief that you know what's best for someone entitles you to take their choices, their resources, their family, and their future, without asking. Whether wisdom is something that can be self-appointed. He looked at the chamber. I don't think it is. I think this chamber needs to say so clearly, not for me, but for the next person who is 7 years old and has no one looking out for them and no vault to find and no goblin willing to wait 7 years for their authorization. He paused once more. That person is the one this verdict is actually for. He stepped back. The chamber's silence had a different texture now. Not the silence of shock. The silence of 50 people deciding something. Ogden looked at the bench. Then he looked at the chamber. The Wizengamot will deliberate. The deliberation took 4 hours. Harry spent most of it in the anteroom with Serena and Ragnock, drinking tea that a ministry clerk brought in 3 times, each time with the expression of someone who had been told to be helpful and found it very stressful. Sirius came down from the gallery after the first hour and sat without talking, which was the right thing to do. Hermione came down after the second hour with her notepad and sat beside Sirius and also didn't talk, which was also the right thing. Luna came down last and sat beside Harry and said, after a long comfortable quiet, "Your aura was gold all the way through." All the way. It didn't waver once. "It's easy to be steady when you're telling the truth," Harry said. "No, it isn't," Luna said. "It's particularly hard. Most people's auras wobble when they're saying something that makes them vulnerable." She looked at him. "Yours got steadier." Harry thought about that. "I wasn't saying anything vulnerable," he said. "I was saying something true." "Those are different things." Luna considered that with the seriousness she gave everything. "I think you might be right," she said. "Though sometimes they're the same thing." "Sometimes," Harry agreed. Ragnock was at the far end of the room going through documents with the focused industry of someone who was going to be productive regardless of external circumstances. He looked up briefly and met Harry's eyes and gave a single nod that communicated, in the compressed language of someone who had worked with Harry for 3 weeks and learned how much could be said efficiently, something like, "You did well, and the outcome will be what the outcome will be, and either way the bank is with you." Harry nodded back. Serena had her own documents out and had found something in them that required a notation, and she was writing with the purposeful speed of someone whose mind doesn't fully stop. After a moment she looked up and said, "For what it's worth, the speech was better than anything I had prepared." "You hadn't prepared anything for me," Harry said. "No," she agreed. "That's what made it better." When the chamber doors opened and the clerk came to the anteroom, Harry stood up first. They filed back in. The gallery had stayed full, no one had left in 4 hours, which Harry noted. The press gallery was completely still, every quill held. Fudge was back in the minister's box and he looked like a man who had aged 2 years in an afternoon. Dumbledore was back at the respondent's position. He was standing with his hands folded behind his back, and his expression was composed in the way of someone who has accepted, whatever comes, that they have said what they needed to say and must stand with it. Ogden looked at the chamber, at both tables, and then read from the parchment before him. The Wizengamot of Magical Britain, convened in full session on the 23rd of August, 1988, in the matter of the Crown and the Vault of Potter-Black-Merlin versus Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, finds as follows. He paused with the particular breath of someone about to release something. On the charge of fraudulent alteration of a legal will, guilty. 41 votes in favor, 9 opposed. A sound moved through the gallery. Not uproar, controlled, collective, the sound of 50 things recalibrating simultaneously. On the charge of fraudulent misappropriation of protected vault assets over the period of 1981 to 1988, guilty. 44 votes in favor, 6 opposed. Another sound, longer this time. On the charge of illegal facilitation of imprisonment without trial in the matter of Sirius Orion Black, 1981, guilty. 38 votes in favor, 12 opposed. In the gallery, Sirius made a sound that Harry didn't look at directly. He kept his eyes on the bench. On the additional charge of criminal neglect through deliberate placement of a minor in conditions of inadequate care, guilty. 46 votes in favor, 4 opposed. The 4 dissenting votes on that charge were, Harry thought, doing a great deal of work toward writing their own future. Ogden lowered the parchment. On the matter of sentencing, the Wisingamot notes the extraordinary nature of these charges, both in their severity and in the unprecedented position and reputation of the respondent, and acknowledges that no precedent exists for this specific combination of offenses at this level of institutional authority. He looked at the chamber. The petitioner has indicated he wishes to make a recommendation regarding sentencing. The Wisingamot is prepared to hear it. All 50 members looked at Harry. Harry stepped forward. He had thought about this part for longer than any other part. Not the charges were straightforward, the documentation was clear, the outcome was what the evidence demanded. The sentencing was different. Sentencing was where the question shifted from what happened to what it meant. He had talked to Sirius about it. He had talked to Serena. He had read 2 more sections of the Emery's book and thought about what the book said about the difference between punishment and correction, and about what you were actually trying to accomplish when you asked a system to respond to wrongdoing. He had thought about Dumbledore standing in the lane outside the manor, saying I feared you would become someone who could not be guided, and about what it would mean to respond to that with the same kind of unilateral certainty. I'm not going to recommend imprisonment, Harry said. The sound that ran through the chamber this time was different, not the sound of reactions, but of genuine surprise, which was its own form of attention. Imprisonment for Dumbledore would accomplish 3 things, Harry continued. It would punish him. It would remove him from the positions he currently holds. And it would make him a martyr to everyone who believes, and will continue to believe, that he acted with good intentions, which would create a fracture in the wizarding world that I don't think serves anyone. He looked at the chamber. I'm recommending something different. He took a breath. Full financial restitution, with the penalty interest calculated by Gringotts, the 18.7 million figure, to be returned to the Potter-Black-Merlin's vaults in full, with appropriate sums designated for reparation to the Black estate for the 7 years of wrongful imprisonment. He paused. Permanent removal from the position of Chief Warlock of the Wisingamot, effective immediately, and a 5-year prohibition on holding any position of governmental authority or institutional oversight. He may remain headmaster of Hogwarts on the condition that the Hogwarts Board of Governors establishes an independent oversight committee with authority to review his administrative decisions, a committee that includes at least 2 external members and meets quarterly. He looked at Dumbledore now. And one more thing. He held the blue gaze steadily. I want a public record. Not just the Wisingamot's official proceedings, a formal published account of the facts of this case, made available in the Hogwarts Library, the Ministry Archives, and the Wisingamot's public register, so that what happened here is not a private settlement or a quietly handled institutional matter. So that the next person in a position of authority who decides to make unilateral decisions about another person's life and justify it with good intentions has to look at what that looks like, on record, when those intentions are examined. He paused for the last time. I'm not recommending lenience because what he did wasn't serious. I'm recommending this because making this about his punishment rather than about the structure of accountability would be exactly the same mistake he made, prioritizing one person's fate over the actual lesson. He looked at the chamber, all 50 members, the gallery above with its full rows of watching faces. This isn't about Dumbledore. It's about what we decide to be, going forward. About whether the wizarding world is going to be the kind of place where power can be exercised without accountability because the person exercising it is certain they know best. He let that land. I don't think it should be. He stepped back. The chamber was very still. Then Augusta Longbottom, without waiting for a call, said from her senior seat in a voice like good stone, "The Wysengomot will vote on the recommended sentencing." The vote was 39 to 11 in favor of the recommended sentence. The 11 who voted against were voting for imprisonment, not leniency. Serena confirmed this quietly and immediately, which Harry appreciated, because he wanted to know what the 11 represented. She said she thought most of them were voting on principle that the charges warranted more severity, not on the basis of any affiliations, and that she expected the minority position to be noted in the public record alongside the rest. Fudge left the minister's box before the formal close of proceedings, which was cowardly but also meaningless in terms of the outcome. Amelia Bones had 3 separate DMLE investigations open on ministry figures named in Narcissa Malfoy's documents, and Fudge's name was adjacent to enough of them that his quiet departure from this specific room was not going to determine his eventual accounting with anything. Dumbledore stood as the chamber made its formal close, and he stood with the composure of someone who has lost something important and is taking the measure of it. His solicitors leaned in to consult with him and he listened without looking at them, and then he looked across the chamber floor at Harry. Harry looked back. They held the look for a moment that was not hostile and not warm and not complicated in any of the ways it might have been. It was the look of 2 people who understood each other clearly and had different opinions about almost everything. Dumbledore inclined his head slightly. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Harry nodded once. Then Dumbledore turned with his solicitors and left through the far chamber door, and Harry turned to Serena, who was already opening the celebration with the restrained professionalism of putting her documents away in the correct folders, which was her version of it. 18.7 million galleons, she said. The restitution order is effective immediately. Gringotts will process the transfer within 24 hours. Ragnarok, Harry said, and looked at the goblin, who had been sitting at the legal representative's table with the stillness of a very patient, very satisfied person. "We will process it at first thing tomorrow," Ragnarok said, "with our compliments." There was something in the precision of those last 2 words that was deeply, specifically goblin, the satisfaction of a debt correctly called, an account correctly balanced, after 7 years of watching it sit wrong. "Thank you," Harry said. "For all of it. For 4 years of building the case before I even knew it existed." "The case built itself," Ragnarok said, with the honesty of someone who means that exactly. "We simply maintained the documentation." He paused. "It has been the bank's significant privilege," he added, and somehow the formality of the phrasing made it more genuine rather than less. The gallery emptied slowly, the way things empty when people need to process what they just witnessed. Harry went up to meet the others, and Sirius was on his feet by the time Harry reached the top of the gallery stairs, and he put both hands on Harry's shoulders and looked at him for a moment without speaking, which was the right thing, and then said, "James," in a voice that didn't get any further than the one word but didn't need to. Harry put his hand briefly over one of Sirius's and then let it go, and they stood in the emptying gallery while the chamber below cleared out and the press gallery erupted into the organized chaos of people who have a deadline and a story larger than they'd even expected it to be. "What you said about imprisonment," Sirius said. He wasn't challenging it. He was feeling the edges of it. "You meant it." "Yes," Harry said. "He kept me in Azkaban for 7 years. I know. And you recommended, Sirius." Harry looked at him steadily. "If he goes to Azkaban, he becomes the story. Everything shifts to whether the punishment was just, whether he deserved it, whether he was a good man who made mistakes or a bad man who got what he warranted. The public record becomes about him." He paused. The public record being about what he did, and what it means about how authority works, and what the structure of accountability looks like going forward, that's what changes something. Azkaban ends with him. The public record goes on after him. Sirius looked at him for a long moment. "I know you're right," he said. "It just feels," "I know," Harry said. "It doesn't feel like enough." "No. It isn't enough," Harry said. "It'll never be enough. That's not the same as it being wrong." He held Sirius's gaze. He loses the chief warlock position. He loses the oversight role. He loses the ability to be the person who makes unilateral decisions without checks. And every person who comes after him in any of those roles will make those decisions in the shadow of what this record says. He paused. That's what my parents would have wanted. Not his suffering. His accountability. Sirius was quiet for a while. They would have, he said finally. James would have been frustrated about it for at least a week first. I'm frustrated about it now, Harry said. That's allowed. Sirius made the sound that was working its way toward being a fully operational laugh. Yeah, he said. Yeah, it is. Hermione found Harry by the gallery windows, looking down at the emptying chamber below. She stood beside him with the particular quality of presence she had when she wasn't performing anything, no efficiency, no organization, just a person next to a person. You knew what you were going to say about the sentencing before you went in, she said. Most of it, Harry said. The last part, about it not being about him, I found that one this morning. It was the right part, she said. It was what made it something other than an argument about one man. She was quiet for a moment. The 847 precedent held, she added, as a separate observation. The 847 precedent was decisive, Harry confirmed. Augusta Longbottom cited it in the emancipation vote. It set the legal foundation for everything after. Hermione made a very small, very controlled sound of satisfaction. Hermione, Harry said. I know, she said. I'm not going to be insufferable about it. You can be a little insufferable about it. She smiled with her whole face for a moment, the full one she kept under the efficient exterior like the fire Pip kept banked in the study grate. I found another one, she said. Actually. A 9th century precedent about the limits of institutional guardianship authority that might be relevant to the public record requirement you proposed. The Board of Governors Review Committee Marchbanks is building, there's a legal structure for it that goes back further than anyone's cited yet. Send it to Serena, Harry said. She'll want it for the implementation proceedings. Already written up, Hermione said, pulling folded parchment from her bag with the precision of someone who had prepared for this exact moment because they prepared for everything. He took it. He looked at her. Thank you, he said. Not for the research specifically. For all of it. The last month. She looked at him seriously. It matters, she said. What you're doing. Not just for you. What you said in there, about the next person who's 7 years old and has no one looking out for them. She paused. That's the real thing. Yes, Harry said. It is. Luna appeared beside Hermione in the way she always appeared, entirely without apparent transit. She looked at the chamber below them and then at Harry. It's different now, she said. What is? The room, she said. The aura of the room. It was very heavy this morning. Old and heavy, all that accumulated authority pressing down. She tilted her head. It's lighter now. Not empty, lighter. Like something that had been stored wrong for a long time got put back in the right place. Harry looked down at the chamber. The last of the Wisengamot members were filing out. The central floor where he had stood was empty. The curved black stone of the tiered seats held the afternoon light in the way that old stone holds everything, without asking for attention, without offering explanation, simply being there and having been there. Yes, he said. That's it exactly. The evening at Potter Manor was quiet the way evenings are quiet when something large has been completed. Not the quiet of nothing happening, the quiet of aftermath, of things having been done and the world adjusting itself around them. Pip made dinner that was several things at once, as though she had decided that one dish wasn't sufficient for the occasion, and they ate in the kitchen around the big table with the fire going even though it wasn't cold, because the fire felt right, and Sirius told a story about James Potter that Harry hadn't known, about a prank involving a self-expanding tent at a Quidditch match that had managed to accidentally block the snitch for 20 minutes, and Hermione laughed at it with the real Laugh she didn't use on everything, and Luna ate with her left hand while reading the Quibbler with her right side up for once, which meant she was either very comfortable or had forgotten. Harry ate and listened and felt, in a way he had been trying to understand the shape of since the first morning at the manor, the specific texture of what it meant to be somewhere that was yours. Not owned, that was too thin a word for it. Constituted. Like he had arrived at a place he was made of, without knowing it was what he was made of until he was inside it. After dinner, Sirius and Hermione and Luna left in the flue in successive green flashes, and Pip cleared the table with the efficiency of someone who has been waiting their whole life to clear a table that was properly used, and Dob banked the kitchen fire and said good night with the specific gravity of someone for whom good night is a meaningful thing. Harry went to the study. He sat in his father's chair and he picked up the Emery's book and opened it, not to any section he was studying, just to hold it and be in the room and let the day be what it was. The book opened itself to a page he hadn't seen yet. The first line read, "Well done." Just those two words, and below them, in the grain-spelled letters, "Your parents are very proud." I'm not able to communicate with them directly, but I have it on the authority of about 1500 years of magic that love doesn't actually stop when people die. It changes shape. This, what you've done, what you're building, what you said today in that chamber, this is them, in you, still being exactly who they were. Harry read it twice. He didn't cry this time. He sat with it the way you sit with something that is whole and heavy and fully present, with both hands, in the quiet of the firelit room and the house that had been waiting for him and the night that was settling over Godric's Hollow like a careful hand. There is more to do, the book continued, because it always continued. Voldemort. The soul fragment. The work that Dumbledore couldn't see past his own plan to address. There are things coming that will require everything you have, and some things you don't know you have yet, and people standing beside you who will matter more than strategy. But tonight is for being 7 years old and having won something real. Sleep. Tomorrow we work. Harry closed the book. He sat for a while longer in the warm study, with the photographs on the walls, his parents, younger, laughing at something off camera, and the fire doing what fires do and the sound of the house being the sound of a house where someone lives. Then he went to bed. Outside the manor windows, Godric's Hollow was its old quiet self, the lane and the gardens and the sky with its full summer stars, and somewhere underneath all of it, in the foundations and the walls and the deep magic of a place that had been built by people who intended it to last, something settled further into rightness, like a note finding its pitch after a long time of being played slightly off. In London, in the Ministry of Magic, 2 clerks were already processing the financial restitution order. In Gringotts, Ragnarok was reviewing the vault transfer documents with the satisfaction of a man closing an account that should never have been opened. In Azkaban, the cell that had held Sirius Black for 7 years was empty and would remain so. In a school in Scotland, a headmaster sat in his office in the late evening, looking at a letter from the Hogwarts Board of Governors confirming the establishment of an oversight committee, and at the formal citation of the Wisingamots public record requirement, and he sat with them for a very long time. Whether he was thinking about what he had done or about what had been done to him or about the distance between those two things, only he knew. His portraits were asleep. And in a room in Potter Manor, in a house full of the particular quiet of belonging, Harry Potter-Black-Merlin slept without dreaming, with the Emery's book on the nightstand and both his parents' letters in his shirt pocket and tomorrow already prepared, already waiting, already full of the kind of work that mattered. He was 7 years old. He was not small. He was not afraid. And the world, the real world, the one built on the weight of names and the truth of records and the unstoppable logic of things being made right, was, finally, terribly, unmistakably his to shape.